Chapter 1 of A Thin Ghost and Others. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Peter Yearsley. A Thin Ghost and Others by M.R. James. The Residence at Whitminster. Dr. Ashton, Thomas Ashton, Doctor of Divinity, sat in his study, habited in a dressing gown, and with a silk cap on his shaven head, his wig being for the time taken off and placed on its block on a side table. He was a man of some 55 years, strongly made, of a sanguine complexion, an angry eye, and a long upper lip. Face and eye were lighted up, at the moment when I picture him, by the level ray of an afternoon sun that shone in upon him through a tall sash window giving on the west. The room into which it shone was also tall, lined with bookcases, and where the wall showed between them, panelled. On the table near the doctor's elbow was a green cloth, and upon it what he would have called a silver standish, a tray with inkstands, quill pens, a calf-bound book or two, some papers, a churchwarden pipe and brass tobacco box, a flask cased in plaited straw, and a liqueur glass. The year was 1730, the month December, the hour somewhat past 3 in the afternoon. I have described in these lines pretty much all that a superficial observer would have noted when he looked into the room. What met Dr. Ashton's eye when he looked out of it, sitting in his leather armchair? Little more than the tops of the shrubs and fruit trees of his garden could be seen from that point, but the red brick wall of it was visible in almost all the length of its western side. In the middle of that was a gate, a double gate of rather elaborate iron scrollwork, which allowed something of a view beyond. Through it he could see that the ground sloped away almost at once to a bottom along which a stream must run, and rose steeply from it on the other side, up to a field that was park-like in character, and thickly studded with oaks, now, of course, leafless. They did not stand so thick together but that some glimpse of sky and horizon could be seen between their stems. The sky was now golden, and the horizon, a horizon of distant woods it seemed, was purple. But all that Dr. Ashton could find to say, after contemplating this prospect for many minutes, was "Abominable!" A listener would have been aware, immediately upon this, of the sound of footsteps coming somewhat hurriedly in the direction of the study. By the resonance he could have told that they were traversing a much larger room. Dr. Ashton turned round in his chair as the door opened, and looked expectant. The incomer was a lady, a stout lady in the dress of the time. Though I have made some attempt at indicating the doctor's costume, I will not enterprise that of his wife, for it was Mrs. Ashton who now entered. She had an anxious, even a sorely distracted look, and it was in a very disturbed voice that she almost whispered to Dr. Ashton, putting her head close to his, "He's in a very sad way, love. Worse, I'm afraid." "Is he really?" And he leaned back and looked in her face. She nodded. 2 solemn bells, high up and not far away, rang out the half-hour at this moment. Mrs. Ashton started. "Oh, do you think you can give order that the Minster clock be stopped chiming to-night? 'Tis just over his chamber, and will keep him from sleeping, and to sleep is the only chance for him. That's certain." "Why, to be sure, if there were need, real need, it could be done, but not on any light occasion. This Frank, now, do you assure me that his recovery stands upon it?" said Dr. Ashton. His voice was loud and rather hard. "I do verily believe it," said his wife. "Then, if it must be, bid Molly run across to Simpkins and say on my authority that he is to stop the clock chimes at sunset. And, yes, she is after that to say to my Lord Saul that I wish to see him presently in this room." Mrs. Ashton hurried off. Before any other visitor enters, it will be well to explain the situation. Dr. Ashton was the holder, among other preferments, of a prebend in the rich collegiate church of Whitminster, one of the foundations which, though not a cathedral, survived dissolution and reformation, and retained its constitution and endowments for 100 years after the time of which I write. The great church, the residences of the dean and the 2 prebendaries, the choir and its appurtenances, were all intact and in working order. A dean who flourished soon after 1500 had been a great builder, and had erected a spacious quadrangle of red brick adjoining the church for the residence of the officials. Some of these persons were no longer required. Their offices had dwindled down to mere titles, borne by clergy or lawyers in the town and neighbourhood, and so the houses that had been meant to accommodate 8 or 10 people were now shared among 3, the dean and the 2 prebendaries. Dr. Ashton's included what had been the common parlour and the dining hall of the whole body. It occupied a whole side of the court, and at one end had a private door into the minster. The other end, as we have seen, looked out over the country. So much for the house. As for the inmates, Dr. Ashton was a wealthy man and childless, and he had adopted, or rather undertaken to bring up, the orphan son of his wife's sister. Frank Siddle was the lad's name. He had been a good many months in the house. Then one day came a letter from an Irish peer, the Earl of Kildonnan, who had known Dr. Ashton at college, putting it to the doctor whether he would consider taking into his family the Viscount Saul, the Earl's heir, and acting in some sort as his tutor. Lord Kildonnan was shortly to take up a post in the Lisbon embassy, and the boy was unfit to make the voyage. "Not that he is sickly," the Earl wrote, "though you'll find him whimsical, or of late I've thought him so, and to confirm this, 'twas only to-day his old nurse came expressly to tell me he was possessed. But let that pass. I'll warrant you can find a spell to make all straight. Your arm was stout enough in old days, and I give you plenary authority to use it as you see fit. The truth is, he has here no boys of his age or quality to consort with, and is given to moping about in our raths and graveyards, and he brings home romances that fright my servants out of their wits. So there are you and your lady forewarned." It was, perhaps, with half an eye open to the possibility of an Irish bishopric, at which another sentence in the Earl's letter seemed to hint, that Dr. Ashton accepted the charge of my Lord Viscount Saul, and of the 200 guineas a year that were to come with him. So he came one night in September. When he got out of the chaise that brought him, he went first and spoke to the post-boy, and gave him some money, and patted the neck of his horse. Whether he made some movement that scared it or not, there was very nearly a nasty accident, for the beast started violently, and the postilion, being unready, was thrown, and lost his fee, as he found afterwards, and the chaise lost some paint on the gate-posts, and the wheel went over the man's foot who was taking out the baggage. When Lord Saul came up the steps into the light of the lamp in the porch to be greeted by Dr. Ashton, he was seen to be a thin youth of, say, 16 years old, with straight black hair and the pale colouring that is common to such a figure. He took the accident and commotion calmly enough, and expressed a proper anxiety for the people who had been, or might have been, hurt. His voice was smooth and pleasant, and without any trace, curiously, of an Irish brogue. Frank Siddle was a younger boy, perhaps of 11 or 12, but Lord Saul did not, for that, reject his company. Frank was able to teach him various games he had not known in Ireland, and he was apt at learning them, apt too at his books, though he had had little or no regular teaching at home. It was not long before he was making a shift to puzzle out the inscriptions on the tombs in the minster, and he would often put a question to the doctor about the old books in the library that required some thought to answer. It is to be supposed that he made himself very agreeable to the servants, for within 10 days of his coming they were almost falling over each other in their efforts to oblige him. At the same time, Mrs. Ashton was rather put to it to find new maid-servants, for there were several changes, and some of the families in the town from which she had been accustomed to draw seemed to have no one available. She was forced to go further afield than was usual. These generalities I gather from the doctor's notes in his diary, and from letters. They are generalities, and we should like, in view of what has to be told, something sharper and more detailed. We get it in entries which begin late in the year, and, I think, were posted up all together after the final incident, but they cover so few days in all that there is no need to doubt that the writer could remember the course of things accurately. On a Friday morning it was that a fox, or perhaps a cat, made away with Mrs. Ashton's most prized black cockerel, a bird without a single white feather on its body. Her husband had told her often enough that it would make a suitable sacrifice to Aesculapius. That had discomfited her much, and now she would hardly be consoled. The boys looked everywhere for traces of it. Lord Saul brought in a few feathers, which seemed to have been partially burnt on the garden rubbish heap. It was on the same day that Dr. Ashton, looking out of an upper window, saw the two boys playing in the corner of the garden at a game he did not understand. Frank was looking earnestly at something in the palm of his hand. Saul stood behind him, and seemed to be listening. After some minutes he very gently laid his hand on Frank's head, and almost instantly thereupon Frank suddenly dropped whatever it was he was holding, clapped his hands to his eyes, and sank down on the grass. Saul, whose face expressed great anger, hastily picked the object up, of which it could only be seen that it was glittering, put it in his pocket, and turned away, leaving Frank huddled up on the grass. Dr. Ashton rapped on the window to attract their attention, and Saul looked up as if in alarm, and then, springing to Frank, pulled him up by the arm and led him away. When they came in to dinner, Saul explained that they had been acting a part of the tragedy of Rhadamistus, in which the heroine reads the future fate of her father's kingdom by means of a glass ball held in her hand, and is overcome by the terrible events she has seen. During this explanation Frank said nothing, only looked rather bewilderedly at Saul. He must, Mrs. Ashton thought, have contracted a chill from the wet of the grass, for that evening he was certainly feverish and disordered, and the disorder was of the mind as well as the body, for he seemed to have something he wished to say to Mrs. Ashton, only a press of household affairs prevented her from paying attention to him, and when she went, according to her habit, to see that the light in the boys' chamber had been taken away, and to bid them good night, he seemed to be sleeping, though his face was unnaturally flushed to her thinking. Lord Saul, however, was pale and quiet, and smiling in his slumber. Next morning it happened that Dr. Ashton was occupied in church and other business, and unable to take the boys' lessons. He therefore set them tasks to be written and brought to him. 3 times, if not oftener, Frank knocked at the study door, and each time the doctor chanced to be engaged with some visitor, and sent the boy off rather roughly, which he later regretted. 2 clergymen were at dinner this day, and both remarked, being fathers of families, that the lad seemed sickening for a fever, in which they were too near the truth, and it had been better if he had been put to bed forthwith, for a couple of hours later in the afternoon he came running into the house, crying out in a way that was really terrifying, and, rushing to Mrs. Ashton, clung about her, begging her to protect him, and saying, "Keep them off! Keep them off!" without intermission. And it was now evident that some sickness had taken strong hold of him. He was therefore got to bed in another chamber from that in which he commonly lay, and the physician brought to him, who pronounced the disorder to be grave and affecting the lad's brain, and prognosticated a fatal end to it if strict quiet were not observed, and those sedative remedies used which he should prescribe. We are now come, by another way, to the point we had reached before. The Minster clock has been stopped from striking, and Lord Saul is on the threshold of the study. "What account can you give of this poor lad's state?" was Dr. Ashton's first question. "Why, sir, little more than you know already, I fancy. I must blame myself, though, for giving him a fright yesterday when we were acting that foolish play you saw. I fear I made him take it more to heart than I meant." "How so?" "Well, by telling him foolish tales I had picked up in Ireland of what we call the second sight." "Second sight? What kind of sight might that be?" "Why, you know how our ignorant people pretend that some are able to foresee what is to come, sometimes in a glass, or in the air maybe, and at Kildonan we had an old woman that pretended to such a power, and I dare say I coloured the matter more highly than I should, but I never dreamed Frank would take it so near as he did." "You were wrong, my lord, very wrong, in meddling with such superstitious matters at all, and you should have considered whose house you were in, and how little becoming such actions are to my character and person, or to your own. But pray, how came it that you, acting as you say, a play, should fall upon anything that could so alarm Frank?" "That is what I can hardly tell, sir. He passed, all in a moment, from rant about battles and lovers and Cleodora and Antigenes to something I could not follow at all, and then dropped down, as you saw." "Yes. Was that at the moment when you laid your hand on the top of his head?" Lord Saul gave a quick look at his questioner, quick and spiteful, and for the first time seemed unready with an answer. "About that time it may have been," he said. "I have tried to recollect myself, but I am not sure. There was, at any rate, no significance in what I did then." "Ah," said Dr. Ashton. "Well, my lord, I should do wrong were I not to tell you that this fright of my poor nephew may have very ill consequences to him. The doctor speaks very despondingly of his state." Lord Saul pressed his hands together and looked earnestly upon Dr. Ashton. "I am willing to believe that you had no bad intention, as assuredly you could have no reason to bear the poor boy malice, but I cannot wholly free you from blame in the affair." As he spoke, the hurrying steps were heard again, and Mrs. Ashton came quickly into the room, carrying a candle, for the evening had by this time closed in. She was greatly agitated. "Oh, come!" she cried. "Come directly. I'm sure he is going." "Going? Frank? Is it possible? Already?" With some such incoherent words, the doctor caught up a book of prayers from the table and ran out after his wife. Lord Saul stopped for a moment where he was. Molly, the maid, saw him bend over and put both hands to his face. If it were the last words she had to speak, she said afterwards, he was striving to keep back a fit of laughing. Then he went out softly, following the others. Mrs. Ashton was sadly right in her forecast. I have no inclination to imagine the last scene in detail. What Dr. Ashton records is, or may be taken to be, important to the story. They asked Frank if he would like to see his companion, Lord Saul, once again. The boy was quite collected, it appears, in these moments. "No," he said, "I do not want to see him, but you should tell him I am afraid he will be very cold." "What do you mean, my dear?" said Mrs. Ashton. "Only that," said Frank. "But say to him besides that I am free of them now, but he should take care. And I'm sorry about your black cockerel, Aunt Ashton, but he said we must use it so if we were to see all that could be seen." Not many minutes after he was gone. Both the Ashtons were grieved, she, naturally, most, but the doctor, though not an emotional man, felt the pathos of the early death. And besides, there was the growing suspicion that all had not been told him by Saul, and that there was something here which was out of his beaten track. When he left the chamber of death, it was to walk across the quadrangle of the residence to the sexton's house. A passing bell, the greatest of the Minster bells, must be rung. A grave must be dug in the Minster yard, and there was now no need to silence the chiming of the Minster clock. As he came slowly back in the dark, he thought he must see Lord Saul again. That matter of the black cockerel, trifling as it might seem, would have to be cleared up. It might be merely a fancy of the sick boy, but if not, was there not a witch trial he had read, in which some grim little rite of sacrifice had played a part? Yes, he must see Saul. I rather guess these thoughts of his than find written authority for them. That there was another interview is certain. Certain also that Saul would, or, as he said, could, throw no light on Frank's words, though the message, or some part of it, appeared to affect him horribly. But there is no record of the talk in detail. It is only said that Saul sat all that evening in the study, and when he bid good night, which he did most reluctantly, asked for the doctor's prayers. The month of January was near its end when Lord Kildonan, in the embassy at Lisbon, received a letter that, for once, gravely disturbed that vain man and neglectful father. Saul was dead. The scene at Frank's burial had been very distressing. The day was awful in blackness and wind. The bearers, staggering blindly along under the flapping black pall, found it a hard job, when they emerged from the porch of the Minster, to make their way to the grave. Mrs. Ashton was in her room. Women did not then go to their kinfolk's funerals. But Saul was there, draped in the mourning cloak of the time, and his face was white and fixed as that of one dead, except when, as was noticed 3 or 4 times, he suddenly turned his head to the left and looked over his shoulder. It was then alive with a terrible expression of listening fear. No one saw him go away, and no one could find him that evening. All night the gale buffeted the high windows of the church, and howled over the upland, and roared through the woodland. It was useless to search in the open. No voice of shouting or cry for help could possibly be heard. All that Dr. Ashton could do was to warn the people about the college and the town constables, and to sit up on the alert for any news, and this he did. News came early next morning, brought by the sexton, whose business it was to open the church for early prayers at 7, and who sent the maid rushing upstairs with wild eyes and flying hair to summon her master. The 2 men dashed across to the south door of the Minster, there to find Lord Saul clinging desperately to the great ring of the door, his head sunk between his shoulders, his stockings in rags, his shoes gone, his legs torn and bloody. This was what had to be told to Lord Kildonan, and this really ends the first part of the story. The tomb of Frank Siddle and of the Lord Viscount Saul, only child and heir to William Earl of Kildonan, is a stone altar tomb in Whitminster churchyard. Dr. Ashton lived on for over 30 years in his prebendal house. I do not know how quietly, but without visible disturbance. His successor preferred a house he already owned in the town, and left that of the senior prebendary vacant. Between them, these 2 men saw the 18th century out, and the 19th in, for Mr. Hinds, the successor of Ashton, became prebendary at 29, and died at 89, so that it was not till 1823 or 1824 that anyone succeeded to the post who intended to make the house his home. The man who did was Dr. Henry Aldis, whose name may be known to some of my readers as that of the author of a row of volumes labelled Aldis's Works, which occupy a place that must be honoured, since it is so rarely touched, upon the shelves of many a substantial library. Dr. Aldis, his niece, and his servants took some months to transfer furniture and books from his Dorsetshire parsonage to the quadrangle of Whitminster, and to get everything into place. But eventually the work was done, and the house, which, though untenanted, had always been kept sound and weather-tight, woke up, and, like Monte Cristo's mansion at Auteuil, lived, sang, and bloomed once more. On a certain morning in June it looked especially fair, as Dr. Aldis strolled in his garden before breakfast, and gazed over the red roof at the Minster Tower with its 4 gold vanes, backed by a very blue sky and very white little clouds. "Mary," he said, as he seated himself at the breakfast table and laid down something hard and shiny on the cloth, "here's a find which the boy made just now. You'll be sharper than I if you can guess what it's meant for." It was a round and perfectly smooth tablet, as much as an inch thick, of what seemed clear glass. "It is rather attractive at all events," said Mary. She was a fair woman with light hair and large eyes, rather a devotee of literature. "Yes," said her uncle. "I thought you'd be pleased with it. I presume it came from the house. It turned up in the rubbish heap in the corner." "I'm not sure that I do like it after all," said Mary some minutes later. Why in the world not, my dear?
I don't know, I'm sure. Perhaps it's only fancy.
Yes, only fancy and romance, of course. What's that book now? The name of that book, I mean, that you had your head in all yesterday.
The Talisman, uncle. Oh, if this should turn out to be a talisman, how enchanting it would be.
Yes, the Talisman. Ah, well, you're welcome to it, whatever it is. I must be off about my business. Is all well in the house? Does it suit you? Any complaints from the servants' hall?
No, indeed, nothing could be more charming. The only soupçon of a complaint, besides the lock of the linen closet, which I told you of, is that Mrs. Maple says she cannot get rid of the sawflies out of that room you pass through at the other end of the hall. By the way, are you sure you like your bedroom? It is a long way off from anyone else, you know.
Like it? To be sure I do. The further off from you, my dear, the better. There, don't think it necessary to beat me, accept my apologies. But what are sawflies? Will they eat my coats? If not, they may have the room to themselves, for what I care. We are not likely to be using it.
No, of course not. Well, what she calls sawflies are those reddish things like a daddy-long-legs, but smaller, and there are a great many of them perching about that room, certainly. I don't like them, but I don't fancy they are mischievous.
Footnote. Apparently the ichneumon fly, Ophion obscurum, and not the true sawfly, is meant. End footnote. There seem to be several things you don't like this fine morning, said her uncle as he closed the door. Miss Aldis remained in her chair looking at the tablet which she was holding in the palm of her hand. The smile that had been on her face faded slowly from it, and gave place to an expression of curiosity and almost strained attention. Her reverie was broken by the entrance of Mrs. Maple, and her invariable opening.
"Oh, miss, could I speak to you a minute?"
A letter from Miss Aldis to a friend in Lichfield, begun a day or two before, is the next source for this story. It is not devoid of traces of the influence of that leader of female thought in her day, Miss Anna Seward, known to some as the Swan of Lichfield. My sweetest Emily will be rejoiced to hear that we are at length, my beloved uncle and myself, settled in the house that now calls us master, nay, master and mistress, as in past ages it has called so many others. Here we taste a mingling of modern elegance and hoary antiquity, such as has never, ere now, graced life for either of us. The town, small as it is, affords us some reflection, pale indeed, but veritable, of the sweets of polite intercourse. The adjacent country numbers amid the occupants of its scattered mansions some whose polish is annually refreshed by contact with metropolitan splendour, and others whose robust and homely geniality is, at times, and by way of contrast, not less cheering and acceptable. Tired of the parlours and drawing-rooms of our friends, we have ready to hand a refuge from the clash of wits or the small talk of the day, amid the solemn beauties of our venerable Minster, whose sylvan chimes daily knoll us to prayer, and in the shady walks of whose tranquil graveyard we muse with softened heart, and ever and anon, with moistened eye, upon the memorials of the young, the beautiful, the aged, the wise, and the good. Here there is an abrupt break, both in the writing and the style. But, my dearest Emily, I can no longer write with the care which you deserve, and in which we both take pleasure. What I have to tell you is wholly foreign to what has gone before. This morning my uncle brought in to breakfast an object which had been found in the garden. It was a glass or crystal tablet of this shape, a little sketch is given, which he handed to me, and which, after he left the room, remained on the table by me. I gazed at it, I know not why, for some minutes, till called away by the day's duties, and you will smile incredulously when I say that I seemed to myself to begin to descry, reflected in it, objects and scenes which were not in the room where I was. You will not, however, be surprised that, after such an experience, I took the first opportunity to seclude myself in my room with
what I now half believed to be a talisman of mickle might. I was not disappointed. I assure you, Emily, by that memory which is dearest to both of us, that what I went through this afternoon transcends the limits of what I had before deemed credible. In brief, what I saw seated in my bedroom in the broad daylight of summer, and looking into the crystal depth of that small round tablet, was this. First, a prospect, strange to me, of an enclosure of rough and hillocky grass, with a grey stone ruin in the midst, and a wall of rough stones about it. In this stood an old and very ugly woman, in a red cloak and ragged skirt, talking to a boy dressed in the fashion of maybe 100 years ago. She put something which glittered into his hand, and he something into hers, which I saw to be money, for a single coin fell from her trembling hand into the grass. The scene passed. I should have remarked, by the way, that on the rough walls of the enclosure I could distinguish bones, and even a skull, lying in a disorderly fashion. Next I was looking upon two boys, one the figure of the former vision, the other younger. They were in a plot of garden, walled round, and this garden, in spite of the difference in arrangement and the small size of the trees, I could clearly recognise as being that upon which I now look from my window. The boys were engaged in some curious play, it seemed. Something was smouldering on the ground. The elder placed his hands upon it, and then raised them in what I took to be an attitude of prayer, and I saw, and started at seeing, that on them were deep stains of blood. The sky above was overcast. The same boy now turned his face towards the wall of the garden, and beckoned with both his raised hands, and as he did so, I was conscious that some moving objects were becoming visible over the top of the wall. Whether heads or other parts of some animal or human forms, I could not tell. Upon the instant, the elder boy turned sharply, seized the arm of the younger, who all this time had been poring over what lay on the ground, and both hurried off. I then saw blood upon the grass, a little pile of bricks, and what I thought were black feathers scattered about. That scene closed, and the next was so dark that perhaps the full meaning of it escaped me, but what I seemed to see was a form, at first crouching low among trees or bushes that were being threshed by a violent wind, then running very swiftly and constantly turning a pale face to look behind him, as if he feared a pursuer. And indeed pursuers were following hard after him. The shapes were but dimly seen, their number 3 or 4 perhaps, only guessed. I suppose they were on the whole more like dogs than anything else, but dogs such as we have seen they assuredly were not. Could I have closed my eyes to this horror, I would have done so at once, but I was helpless. The last I saw was the victim darting beneath an arch and clutching at some object to which he clung, and those that were pursuing him overtook him, and I seemed to hear the echo of a cry of despair. It may be that I became unconscious. Certainly I had the sensation of awaking to the light of day after an interval of darkness. Such, in literal truth, Emily, was my vision, I can call it by no other name, of this afternoon. Tell me, have I not been the unwilling witness of some episode of a tragedy connected with this very house?
The letter is continued next day.
The tale of yesterday was not completed when I laid down my pen. I said nothing of my experiences to my uncle. You know yourself how little his robust common sense would be prepared to allow of them, and how, in his eyes, the specific remedy would be a black draught or a glass of port. After a silent evening, then, silent, not sullen, I retired to rest. Judge of my terror when, not yet in bed, I heard what I can only describe as a distant bellow, and knew it for my uncle's voice, though never in my hearing so exerted before. His sleeping-room is at the further extremity of this large house, and to gain access to it one must traverse an antique hall some 80 feet long, and a lofty panelled chamber, and 2 unoccupied bedrooms. In the second of these, a room almost devoid of furniture, I found him, in the dark, his candle lying smashed on the floor. As I ran in, bearing a light, he clasped me in arms that trembled for the first time since I have known him, thanked God, and hurried me out of the room. He would say nothing of what had alarmed him. Tomorrow, tomorrow, was all I could get from him. A bed was hastily improvised for him in the room next to my own. I doubt if his night was more restful than mine. I could only get to sleep in the small hours when daylight was already strong, and then my dreams were of the grimmest, particularly one which stamped itself on my brain, and which I must set down on the chance of dispersing the impression it has made. It was that I came up to my room with a heavy foreboding of evil oppressing me, and went with a hesitation and reluctance I could not explain to my chest of drawers. I opened the top drawer, in which was nothing but ribbons and handkerchiefs, and then the second, where there was as little to alarm, and then, oh heavens, the third and last, and there was a mass of linen neatly folded, upon which, as I looked with curiosity that began to be tinged with horror, I perceived a movement in it, and a pink hand was thrust out of the folds, and began to grope feebly in the air. I could bear it no more, and rushed from the room, clapping the door after me, and strove with all my force to lock it, but the key would not turn in the wards, and from within the room came a sound of rustling and bumping, drawing nearer and nearer to the door. Why I did not flee down the stairs I know not. I continued grasping the handle, and mercifully, as the door was plucked from my hand with an irresistible force, I awoke. You may not think this very alarming, but I assure you it was so to me. At breakfast to-day my uncle was very uncommunicative, and, I think, ashamed of the fright he had given us. But afterwards he inquired of me whether Mr. Spearman was still in town, adding that he thought that was a young man who had some sense left in his head. I think you know, my dear Emily, that I am not inclined to disagree with him there, and also that I was not unlikely to be able to answer his question. To Mr. Spearman he accordingly went, and I have not seen him since. I must send this strange budget of news to you now, or it may have to wait over more than one post. The reader will not be far out if he guesses that Miss Mary and Mr. Spearman made a match of it not very long after this month of June. Mr. Spearman was a young spark who had a good property in the neighbourhood of Whitminster, and not unfrequently about this time spent a few days at the King's Head, ostensibly on business. But he must have had some leisure, for his diary is copious, especially for the days of which I am telling the story. It is probable to me that he wrote this episode as fully as he could at the bidding of Miss Mary. Uncle Aldous, how I hope I may have the right to call him so before long, called this morning. After throwing out a good many short remarks on indifferent topics, he said, "I wish, Spearman, you'd listen to an odd story and keep a close tongue about it, just for a bit, till I get more light on it." "To be sure," said I. "You may count on me." "I don't know what to make of it," he said. "You know my bedroom. It is well away from everyone else's, and I pass through the great hall and 2 or 3 other rooms to get to it." "Is it at the end next the minster, then?" I asked. "Yes, it is. Well now, yesterday morning my Mary told me that the room next before it was infested with some sort of fly that the housekeeper couldn't get rid of. That may be the explanation, or it may not. What do you think?" "Why," said I, "you've not yet told me what has to be explained." "True enough. I don't believe I have. But, by the by, what are these sawflies? What's the size of them?" I began to wonder if he was touched in the head. "What I call a sawfly," I said very patiently, "is a red animal like a daddy longlegs, but not so big, perhaps an inch long, perhaps less. It is very hard in the body, and to me—" I was going to say particularly offensive, but he broke in. "Come, come, an inch or less, that won't do." "I can only tell you," I said, "what I know. Would it not be better if you told me from first to last what it is that has puzzled you, and then I may be able to give you some kind of an opinion?" He gazed at me meditatively. "Perhaps it would," he said. "I told Mary only to-day that I thought you had some vestiges of sense in your head." I bowed my acknowledgments. "The thing is, I've an odd kind of shyness about talking of it. Nothing of the sort has happened to me before. Well, about 11 o'clock last night, or after, I took my candle and set out for my room. I had a book in my other hand. I always read something for a few minutes before I drop off to sleep. A dangerous habit. I don't recommend it, but I know how to manage my light and my bed curtains. Now then, first, as I stepped out of my study into the great hall that's next to it, and shut the door, my candle went out. I supposed I had clapped the door behind me too quick, and made a draught, and I was annoyed, for I'd no tinder box nearer than my bedroom. But I knew my way well enough, and went on. The next thing was that my book was struck out of my hand in the dark. If I said twitched out of my hand, it would better express the sensation. It fell on the floor. I picked it up and went on, more annoyed than before, and a little startled. But, as you know, that hall has many windows without curtains, and in summer nights like these it is easy to see not only where the furniture is, but whether there's anyone or anything moving, and there was no one, nothing of the kind. So on I went through the hall and through the audit chamber next to it, which also has big windows, and then into the bedrooms which lead to my own, where the curtains were drawn, and I had to go slower because of steps here and there. It was in the second of those rooms that I nearly got my quietus. The moment I opened the door of it, I felt there was something wrong. I thought twice, I confess, whether I shouldn't turn back and find another way there is to my room, rather than go through that one. Then I was ashamed of myself, and thought what people call better of it, though I don't know about better in this case. If I was to describe my experience exactly, I should say this. There was a dry, light, rustling sound all over the room as I went in, and then, you remember it was perfectly dark. Something seemed to rush at me, and there was, I don't know how to put it, a sensation of long, thin arms, or legs, or feelers all about my face and neck and body. Very little strength in them there seemed to be, but, Spearman, I don't think I was ever more horrified or disgusted in all my life that I remember, and it does take something to put me out. I roared out as loud as I could, and flung away my candle at random, and, knowing I was near the window, I tore at the curtain, and somehow let in enough light to be able to see something waving, which I knew was an insect's leg by the shape of it. But, Lord, what a size! Why, the beast must have been as tall as I am, and now you tell me sawflies are an inch long or less. What do you make of it, Spearman? For goodness sake, finish your story first, I said. I never heard anything like it. Oh, said he, there's no more to tell. Mary ran in with a light, and there was nothing there. I didn't tell her what was the matter. I changed my room for last night, and I expect for good. Have you searched this odd room of yours? I said. What do you keep in it? We don't use it, he answered. There's an old press there, and some little other furniture. And in the press? Said I. I don't know, I never saw it opened, but I do know that it's locked. Well, I should have it looked into, and if you had time, I own to having some curiosity to see the place myself. I didn't exactly like to ask you, but that's rather what I hoped you'd say. Name your time, and I'll take you there. No time like the present, I said at once, for I saw he would never settle down to anything while this affair was in suspense. He got up with great alacrity, and looked at me, I am tempted to think, with marked approval. Come along, was all he said, however, and was pretty silent all the way to his house. My Mary, as he called her in public and I in private, was summoned, and we proceeded to the room. The doctor had gone so far as to tell her that he had had something of a fright there last night, of what nature he had not yet divulged. But now he pointed out and described very briefly the incidents of his progress. When we were near the important spot, he pulled up and allowed me to pass on. There's the room, he said. Go in, Spearman, and tell us what you find. Whatever I might have felt at midnight, noonday, I was sure, would keep back anything sinister, and I flung the door open with an air and stepped in. It was a well-lighted room, with its large window on the right, though not, I thought, a very airy one. The principal piece of furniture was the gaunt old press of dark wood. There was, too, a four-post bedstead, a mere skeleton, which could hide nothing, and there was a chest of drawers. On the window-sill and the floor near it were the dead bodies of many hundred sawflies, and one torpid one which I had some satisfaction in killing. I tried the door of the press, but could not open it. The drawers, too, were locked. Somewhere, I was conscious, there was a faint rustling sound, but I could not locate it, and when I made my report to those outside, I said nothing of it. But, I said, clearly the next thing was to see what was in those locked receptacles. Uncle Aldous turned to Mary. "Mrs. Maple," he said, and Mary ran off. No one, I am sure, stepped like her, and soon came back at a soberer pace, with an elderly lady of discreet aspect. "Have you the keys of these things, Mrs. Maple?" said Uncle Aldous. His simple words let loose a torrent, not violent, but copious, of speech. Had she been a shade or two higher in the social scale, Mrs. Maple might have stood as the model for Miss Bates. "Oh, Doctor, and Miss, and you too, sir," she said, acknowledging my presence with a bend. "Them keys. Who was that again that come when first we took over things in this house? A gentleman in business it was, and I gave him his luncheon in the small parlour on account of us not having everything as we should like to see it in the large one. Chicken and apple pie and a glass of Madeira. Dear, dear, you'll say I'm running on, Miss Mary, but I only mention it to bring back my recollection, and there it comes. Gardner! Just the same as it did last week, with the artichokes and the text of the sermon. Now that Mr. Gardner, every key I got from him were labelled to itself, and each and every one was a key of some door or another in this house, and sometimes two. And when I say door, my meaning is door of a room, not like such a press as this is. Yes, Miss Mary, I know full well, and I'm just making it clear to your uncle, and you too, sir. But now there was a box which this same gentleman he give over into my charge, and thinking no harm after he was gone, I took the liberty, knowing it was your uncle's property, to rattle it. And unless I'm most surprisingly deceived, in that box there was keys, but what keys, that, Doctor, is known elsewhere, for open the box, no, that I would not do." I wondered that Uncle Aldous remained as quiet as he did under this address. Mary, I knew, was amused by it, and he probably had been taught by experience that it was useless to break in upon it. At any rate he did not, but merely said at the end, "Have you that box handy, Mrs. Maple? If so, you might bring it here." Mrs. Maple pointed her finger at him, either in accusation or in gloomy triumph. "There," she said, "was I to choose out the very words out of your mouth, Doctor, them would be the ones, and if I've took it to my own rebuke 1/2 times, it's been nearer 50. Laid awake I have in my bed, sat down in my chair I have, the same you and Miss Mary gave me the day I was 20 year in your service, and no person could desire a better. Yes, Miss Mary, but it is the truth, and well we know who it is would have it different if he could. All very well, says I to myself, but pray, when the doctor calls you to account for that box, what are you going to say? No, Doctor, if you was some masters I've heard of, and I was some servants I could name, I should have an easy task before me, but things being, humanly speaking, what they are, the one course open to me is just to say to you that without Miss Mary comes to my room and helps me to my recollection, which her wits may manage what's slipped beyond mine, no such box as that, small though it be, will cross your eyes this many a day to come." "Why, dear Miss Maple, why didn't you tell me before that you wanted me to help you to find it?" said my Mary. "No, never mind telling me why it was. Let us come at once and look for it." They hastened off together. I could hear Miss Maple beginning an explanation which, I doubt not, lasted into the furthest recesses of the housekeeper's department. Uncle Aldous and I were left alone. "A valuable servant," he said, nodding towards the door. "Nothing goes wrong under her. The speeches are seldom over 3 minutes." "How will Miss Aldous manage to make her remember about the box?" I asked. "Mary? Oh, she'll make her sit down and ask her about her aunt's last illness, or who gave her the china dog on the mantelpiece, something quite off the point. Then, as Maple says, one thing brings up another, and the right one will come round sooner than you could suppose. There, I believe I hear them coming back already." It was indeed so, and Mrs. Maple was hurrying on ahead of Mary with the box in her outstretched hand and a beaming face. "What was it?" she cried as she drew near. "What was it, as I said, before ever I come out of Dorsetshire to this place? Not that I'm a Dorset woman myself, nor had need to be. Safe bind, safe find. And there it was, in the place where I'd put it, 2 months back, I dare say." She handed it to Uncle Aldous, and he and I examined it with some interest, so that I ceased to pay attention to Mrs. Ann Maple for the moment, though I know that she went on to expound exactly where the box had been, and in what way Mary had helped to refresh her memory on the subject. It was an oldish box, tied with pink tape and sealed, and on the lid was pasted a label inscribed in old ink, "The Senior Prebendary's House, Whitminster." On being opened, it was found to contain 2 keys of moderate size, and a paper on which, in the same hand as the label, was "Keys of the press and box of drawers standing in the disused chamber." Also this: "The effects in this press and box are held by me, and to be held by my successors in the residence, in trust for the noble family of Kildonan, if claim be made by any survivor of it. I, having made all the inquiry possible to myself, am of the opinion that the noble house is wholly extinct, the last earl having been, as is notorious, cast away at sea, and his only child and heir deceased in my house, the papers as to which melancholy casualty were by me reposed in the same press in this year of our Lord 1753, 21st of March. I am further of opinion that unless grave discomfort arise, such persons not being of the family of Kildonan, as shall become possessed of these keys, will be well advised to leave matters as they are. Which opinion I do not express without weighty and sufficient reason, and am happy to have my judgment confirmed by the other members of this college and church, who are conversant with the events referred to in this paper. Thomas Ashton, S.T.P., Prebendary Senior; Will Blake, S.T.P., Decanus; Henry Goodman, S.T.B., Prebendary Junior. "Ah," said Uncle Aldous, "grave discomfort. So he thought there might be something. I suspect it was that young man," he went on, pointing with the key to the line about the only child and heir. "Eh, Mary? The Viscounty of Kildonan was Saul." "How do you know that, uncle?" said Mary. "Oh, why not? It's all in Debrett. 2 little fat books. But I meant the tomb by the Lime Walk. He's there. What's the story, I wonder? Do you know it, Mrs. Maple? And, by the way, look at your sawflies by the window there." Mrs. Maple, thus confronted with 2 subjects at once, was a little put to it to do justice to both. It was, no doubt, rash in Uncle Aldous to give her the opportunity. I could only guess that he had some slight hesitation about using the key he held in his hand. "Oh, them flies, how bad they was, Doctor and Miss, this 3 or 4 days, and you too, sir, you wouldn't guess, none of you. And how they come, too. First we took the room in hand. The shutters was up, and had been, I dare say, years upon years, and not a fly to be seen. Then we got the shutter bars down, with a deal of trouble, and left it so for the day, and next day I sent Susan in with the broom to sweep about, and not 2 minutes hadn't passed when out she came into the hall like a blind thing, and we had regular to beat them off her. Why, her cap and her hair, you couldn't see the colour of it, I do assure you, and all clustering round her eyes too. Fortunate enough she's not a girl with fancies, else if it had been me, why, only the tickling of the nasty things would have drove me out of my wits. And now there they lay like so many dead things. Well, they was lively enough on the Monday, and now here's Thursday, is it? Or no, Friday. Only to come near the door, and you'd hear them pattering up against it. And once you opened it, dash at you they would, as if they'd eat you. I couldn't help thinking to myself, if you was bats, where should we be this night? Nor you can't crash 'em, not like a usual kind of fly. Well, there's something to be thankful for, if we could but learn by it. And then this tomb, too," she said, hastening on to her second point to elude any chance of interruption, "of them 2 poor young lads. I say poor, and yet when I recollect myself I was at tea with Mrs. Simpkins, the sexton's wife, before you come, Doctor and Miss Mary, and that's a family has been in the place, I dare say 100 years in that very house, and could put their hand on any tomb or yet grave in all the yard, and give you name and age. And his account of that young man, Mr. Simpkins's I mean to say, well," she compressed her lips and nodded several times, Tell us, Mrs. Maple, said Mary. Go on, said Uncle Aldous. What about him? Said I. Never was such a thing seen in this place, not since Queen Mary's times and the Pope and all, said Mrs. Maple. Why, do you know, he lived in this very house, him and them that was with him, and for all I can tell, in this identical room. She shifted her feet uneasily on the floor. Who was with him? Do you mean the people of the house? Said Uncle Aldous suspiciously. Not to call people, Doctor, dear no, was the answer. More what he brought with him from Ireland, I believe it was. No, the people in the house was the last to hear anything of his goings-on, but in the town not a family but knew how he stopped out at night, and them that was with him, why, they were such as would strip the skin from the child in its grave, and a withered heart makes an ugly thin ghost, says Mr. Simpkins. But they turned on him at the last, he says, and there's the mark still to be seen on the Minster door where they run him down, and that's no more than the truth, for I got him to show it to myself, and that's what he said. A lord he was, with a Bible name of a wicked king, whatever his godfathers could have been thinking of. Saul was the name, said Uncle Aldous. To be sure it was Saul, Doctor, and thank you. And now isn't it King Saul that we read of raising up the dead ghost that was slumbering in its tomb till he disturbed it? And isn't that a strange thing, this young lord to have such a name, and Mr. Simpkins's grandfather to see him out of his window of a dark night, going about from one grave to another in the yard with a candle, and them that was with him following through the grass at his heels, and one night him to come right up to old Mr. Simpkins's window that gives on the yard, and press his face up against it, to find out if there was anyone in the room that could see him, and only just time there was for old Mr. Simpkins to drop down like quiet just under the window and hold his breath, and not stir till he heard him stepping away again, and this rustling like in the grass after him as he went, and then when he looked out of his window in the morning there was treadings in the grass and a dead man's bone. Oh, he was a cruel child for certain, but he had to pay in the end, and after. After? Said Uncle Aldous with a frown. Oh, yes, Doctor. Night after night in old Mr. Simpkins's time, and his son, that's our Mr. Simpkins's father, yes, and our own Mr. Simpkins too, up against that same window, particular when they've had a fire of a chilly evening, with his face right on the panes, and his hands fluttering out, and his mouth open and shut, for a minute or more, and then gone off in the dark yard. But open the window at such times, no, that they dare not do, though they could find it in their heart to pity the poor thing, that pinched up with the cold, and seemingly fading away to a nothink as the years passed on. Well, indeed, I believe it is no more than the truth what our Mr. Simpkins says on his own grandfather's word. A withered heart makes an ugly thin ghost. I dare say, said Uncle Aldous suddenly, so suddenly that Mrs. Maple stopped short. Thank you. Come away, all of you. Why, Uncle, said Mary, are you not going to open the press after all? Uncle Aldous blushed, actually blushed. My dear, he said, you are at liberty to call me a coward, or applaud me as a prudent man, whichever you please, but I am neither going to open that press, nor that chest of drawers, myself, nor am I going to hand over the keys to you or to any other person. Mrs. Maple, will you kindly see about getting a man or two to move those pieces of furniture into the garret? And when they do it, Mrs. Maple, said Mary, who seemed to me, I did not then know why, more relieved than disappointed by her uncle's decision, I have something that I want put with the rest, only quite a small packet. We left that curious room, not unwillingly, I think. Uncle Aldous's orders were carried out that same day, and so, concludes Mr. Spearman, Whitminster has a Bluebeard's chamber, and I am rather inclined to suspect a jack-in-the-box, awaiting some future occupant of the residence of the senior prebendary. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of A Thin Ghost and Others by M.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Yearsley. The Diary of Mr. Poynter. The sale-room of an old and famous firm of book auctioneers in London is, of course, a great meeting-place for collectors, librarians, dealers, not only when an auction is in progress, but perhaps even more notably when books that are coming on for sale are upon view. It was in such a sale-room that the remarkable series of events began
which were detailed to me not many months ago by the person whom they principally affected, namely Mr. James Denton, M.A., F.S.A., etc., etc., sometime of Trinity Hall, now, or lately, of Rendcombe Manor in the county of Warwick. He, on a certain spring day not many years since, was in London for a few days upon business connected principally with the furnishing of the house which he had just finished building at Rendcombe. It may be a disappointment to you to learn that Rendcombe Manor was new. That I cannot help. There had, no doubt, been an old house, but it was not remarkable for beauty or interest. Even had it been, neither beauty nor interest would have enabled it to resist the disastrous fire which, about a couple of years before the date of my story, had razed it to the ground. I am glad to say that all that was most valuable in it had been saved, and that it was fully insured, so that it was with a comparatively light heart that Mr. Denton was able to face the task of building a new and considerably more convenient dwelling for himself and his aunt, who constituted his whole ménage. Being in London, with time on his hands, and not far from the sale-room at which I have obscurely hinted, Mr. Denton thought that he would spend an hour there upon the chance of finding among that portion of the famous Thomas collection of manuscripts, which he knew to be then on view, something bearing upon the history or topography of his part of Warwickshire. He turned in accordingly, purchased a catalogue, and ascended to the sale-room, where, as usual, the books were disposed in cases, and some laid out upon the long tables. At the shelves, or sitting about among the tables, were figures, many of whom were familiar to him. He exchanged nods and greetings with several, and then settled down to examine his catalogue and note likely items. He had made good progress through about 200 of the 500 lots, every now and then rising to take a volume from the shelf and give it a cursory glance, when a hand was laid on his shoulder, and he looked up. His interrupter was one of those intelligent men with a pointed beard and a flannel shirt, of whom the last quarter of the 19th century was, it seems to me, very prolific. It is no part of my plan to repeat the whole conversation which ensued between the two. I must content myself with stating that it largely referred to common acquaintances, e.g. to the nephew of Mr. Denton's friend, who had recently married and settled in Chelsea, to the sister-in-law of Mr. Denton's friend, who had been seriously indisposed, but was now better, and to a piece of china, which Mr. Denton's friend had purchased some months before at a price much below its true value, from which you will rightly infer that the conversation was rather in the nature of a monologue. In due time, however, the friend bethought himself that Mr. Denton was there for a purpose, and, said he, "What are you looking out for in particular? I don't think there's much in this lot." "Why, I thought there might be some Warwickshire collections, but I don't see anything under Warwick in the catalogue." "No, apparently not," said the friend. "All the same, I believe I noticed something like a Warwickshire diary. What was the name again? Drayton? Potter? Paynter? Either a P or a D, I feel sure." He turned over the leaves quickly. "Yes, here it is. Poynter. Lot 486. That might interest you. There are the books, I think, out on the table. Someone has been looking at them. Well, I must be getting on. Good-bye, you'll look us up, won't you? Couldn't you come this afternoon? We've got a little music about 4. Well then, when you're next in town." He went off. Mr. Denton looked at his watch, and found to his confusion that he could spare no more than a moment before retrieving his luggage and going for the train. The moment was just enough to show him that there were 4 largish volumes of the diary, that it concerned the years about 1710, and that there seemed to be a good many insertions in it of various kinds. It seemed quite worth while to leave a commission of £25 for it, and this he was able to do, for his usual agent entered the room as he was on the point of leaving it. That evening he rejoined his aunt at their temporary abode, which was a small dower house not many 100 yards from the manor. On the following morning the two resumed a discussion that had now lasted for some weeks as to the equipment of the new house. Mr. Denton laid before his relative a statement of the results of his visit to town. particulars of carpets, of chairs, of wardrobes, and of bedroom china.
"Yes, dear," said his aunt. "But I don't see any chintzes here. Did you go to—"
Mr. Denton stamped on the floor. Where else, indeed, could he have stamped? "Oh dear," he said. "The one thing I missed. I am sorry. The fact is, I was on my way there, and I happened to be passing Robbins's." His aunt threw up her hands.
"Robbins's? Then the next thing will be another parcel of horrible old books at some outrageous price. I do think, James, when I am taking all this trouble for you, you might contrive to remember the one or two things which I specially begged you to see after. It's not as if I was asking it for myself. I don't know whether you think I get any pleasure out of it, but if so, I can assure you it's very much the reverse. The thought and worry and trouble I have over it you have no idea of, and you have simply to go to the shops and order the things."
Mr. Denton interposed a moan of penitence. "Oh, aunt—"
"Yes, it's all very well, dear, and I don't want to speak sharply, but you must know how very annoying it is, particularly as it delays the whole of our business for I can't tell how long. Here is Wednesday. The Simpsons come to-morrow, and you can't leave them. Then on Saturday we have friends, as you know, coming for tennis. Yes, indeed, you spoke of asking them yourself, but of course I had to write the notes, and it is ridiculous, James, to look like that. We must occasionally be civil to our neighbours. You wouldn't like to have it said we were perfect bears. What was I saying? Well, anyhow, it comes to this, that it must be Thursday in next week at least, before you can go to town again, and until we have decided upon the chintzes, it is impossible to settle upon one single other thing."
Mr. Denton ventured to suggest that, as the paint and wallpapers had been dealt with, this was too severe a view. But this his aunt was not prepared to admit at the moment. Nor, indeed, was there any proposition he could have advanced which she would have found herself able to accept. However, as the day went on, she receded a little from this position, examined with lessening disfavour the samples and price lists submitted by her nephew, and even in some cases gave a qualified approval to his choice. As for him, he was naturally somewhat dashed by the consciousness of duty unfulfilled, but more so by the prospect of a lawn tennis party, which, though an inevitable evil in August, he had thought there was no occasion to fear in May. But he was to some extent cheered by the arrival on the Friday morning of an intimation that he had secured at the price of £12 10s the 4 volumes of Poynter's manuscript diary, and still more by the arrival on the next morning of the diary itself. The necessity of taking Mr. and Mrs. Simpson for a drive in the car on Saturday morning, and of attending to his neighbours and guests that afternoon, prevented him from doing more than open the parcel until the party had retired to bed on the Saturday night. It was then that he made certain of the fact, which he had before only suspected, that he had indeed acquired the diary of Mr. William Poynter, Squire of Accrington, about 4 miles from his own parish. That same Poynter, who was for a time a member of the circle of Oxford antiquaries, the centre of which was Thomas Hearne, and with whom Hearne seemed ultimately to have quarrelled, a not uncommon episode in the career of that excellent man. As is the case with Hearne's own collections, the diary of Poynter contained a good many notes from printed books, descriptions of coins and other antiquities that had been brought to his notice, and drafts of letters on these subjects, besides the chronicle of everyday events. The description in the sale catalogue had given Mr. Denton no idea of the amount of interest which seemed to lie in the book, and he sat up reading in the first of the 4 volumes until a reprehensibly late hour. On the Sunday morning, after church, his aunt came into the study and was diverted from what she had been going to say to him by the sight of the 4 brown leather quartos on the table. "What are these?" she said suspiciously. "New, aren't they? Oh, are these the things that made you forget my chintzes? I thought so. Disgusting. What did you give for them, I should like to know? Over £10? James, it is really sinful.
Well, if you have money to throw away on this kind of thing, there can be no reason why you should not subscribe, and subscribe handsomely, to my Anti-Vivisection League. There is not, indeed, James, and I shall be very seriously annoyed if— Who did you say wrote them? Old Mr. Poynter of Accrington? Well, of course there is some interest in getting together old papers about this neighbourhood, but £10! She picked up one of the volumes, not that which her nephew had been reading, and opened it at random, dashing it to the floor the next instant with a cry of disgust as an earwig fell from between the pages. Mr. Denton picked it up with a smothered expletive and said, "Poor book. I think you're rather hard on Mr. Poynter." "Was I, my dear? I beg his pardon, but you know I cannot abide those horrid creatures. Let me see if I've done any mischief." "No, I think all's well, but look here what you've opened him on." "Dear me, yes, to be sure. How very interesting. Do unpin it, James, and let me look at it." It was a piece of patterned stuff, about the size of the quarto page, to which it was fastened by an old-fashioned pin. James detached it and handed it to his aunt, carefully replacing the pin in the paper. Now, I do not know exactly what the fabric was, but it had a design printed upon it which completely fascinated Miss Denton. She went into raptures over it, held it against the wall, made James do the same, that she might retire to contemplate it from a distance, then pored over it at close quarters, and ended her examination by expressing in the warmest terms her appreciation of the taste of the ancient Mr. Poynter, who had had the happy idea of preserving this sample in his diary. "It is a most charming pattern," she said, "and remarkable too. Look, James, how delightfully the lines ripple. It reminds one of hair very much, doesn't it? And then these knots of ribbon at intervals. They give just the relief of colour that is wanted. I wonder—" "I was going to say," said James with deference, "I wonder if it would cost much to have it copied for our curtains." "Copied? How could you have it copied, James?" "Well, I don't know the details, but I suppose that it is a printed pattern, and that you could have a block cut from it in wood or metal." "Now, really, that is a capital idea, James. I am almost inclined to be glad that you forgot the chintzes on Monday. At any rate, I'll promise to forgive and forget if you get this lovely old thing copied. No one will have anything in the least like it, and mind, James, we won't allow it to be sold. Now I must go, and I've totally forgotten what it was I came in to say. Never mind, it'll keep." After his aunt had gone, James Denton devoted a few minutes to examining the pattern more closely than he had yet had a chance of doing. He was puzzled to think why it should have struck Miss Denton so forcibly. It seemed to him not specially remarkable or pretty. No doubt it was suitable enough for a curtain pattern. It ran in vertical bands, and there was some indication that these were intended to converge at the top. She was right, too, in thinking that these main bands resembled rippling, almost curling, tresses of hair. Well, the main thing was to find out, by means of trade directories or otherwise, what firm would undertake the reproduction of an old pattern of this kind. Not to delay the reader over this portion of the story, a list of likely names was made out, and Mr. Denton fixed a day for calling on them, or some of them, with his sample. The first 2 visits which he paid were unsuccessful, but there is luck in odd numbers. The firm in Bermondsey, which was third on his list, was accustomed to handling this line. The evidence they were able to produce justified their being entrusted with the job. Our Mr. Cattell took a fervent personal interest in it. "It's heart-rending, isn't it, sir?" he said, "to picture the quantity of really lovely mediaeval stuff of this kind that lays well nigh unnoticed in many of our residential country houses. Much of it in peril, I take it, of being cast aside as so much rubbish. What is it Shakespeare says? Unconsidered trifles. Ah, I often say he has a word for us all, sir. I say Shakespeare, but I'm well aware all don't hold with me there. I had something of an upset the other day when a gentleman came in, a titled man too, he was, and I think he told me he'd wrote on a topic, and I happened to cite out something about Hercules and the painted cloth. Dear me, you never see such a pother. But as to this, what you've kindly confided to us is a piece of work we shall take a real enthusiasm in achieving it out to the very best of our ability. What man has done, as I was observing only a few weeks back to another esteemed client, man can do. And in 3 to 4 weeks' time, all being well, we shall hope to lay before you evidence to that effect, sir. Take the address, Mr. Riggins, if you please." Such was the general drift of Mr. Cattell's observations on the occasion of his first interview with Mr. Denton. About a month later, being advised that some samples were ready for his inspection, Mr. Denton met him again, and had, it seems, reason to be satisfied with the faithfulness of the reproduction of the design. It had been finished off at the top, in accordance with the indication I mentioned, so that the vertical bands joined, but something still needed to be done in the way of matching the colour of the original. Mr. Cattell had suggestions of a technical kind to offer, with which I need not trouble you. He had also views as to the general desirability of the pattern, which were vaguely adverse. "You say you don't wish this to be supplied, excepting to personal friends equipped with authorization from yourself, sir. It shall be done. I quite understand you wish to keep it exclusive. Lends a catch it, does it not, to the suite? What's every man's, it's been said, is no man's." "Do you think it would be popular if it were generally obtainable?" asked Mr. Denton. "I hardly think it, sir," said Cattell, pensively clasping his beard. "I hardly think it. Not popular. It wasn't popular with the man that cut the block, was it, Mr. Riggins?" "Did he find it a difficult job?" "He'd no call to do so, sir. But the fact is that the artistic temperament, and our men are artists, sir, every man of them, true artists, as much as many that the world styles by that term, it's apt to take some strange, hardly accountable likes or dislikes. And here was an example. The twice or thrice that I went to inspect his progress, language I could understand, for that's habitual to him, but real distaste for what I should call a dainty enough thing I did not, nor am I now able to fathom. It seemed," said Mr. Cattell, looking narrowly upon Mr. Denton, "as if the man scented something almost evil in the design." "Indeed? Did he tell you, sir? I can't say I see anything sinister in it myself." "Neither can I, sir. In fact, I said as much. 'Come, Gatwick,' I said, 'what's to do here? What's the reason of your prejudice?' For I can call it no more than that. But no explanation was forthcoming, and I was merely reduced, as I am now, to a shrug of the shoulders and a cui bono. However, here it is." And with that the technical side of the question came to the front again. The matching of the colours for the background, the hem, and the knots of ribbon was by far the longest part of the business, and necessitated many sendings to and fro of the original pattern and of new samples. During part of August and September, too, the Dentons were away from the manor, so that it was not until October was well in that a sufficient quantity of the stuff had been manufactured to furnish curtains for the 3 or 4 bedrooms which were to be fitted up with it. On the feast of Simon and Jude, the aunt and nephew returned from a short visit to find all completed, and their satisfaction at the general effect was great. The new curtains, in particular, agreed to admiration with their surroundings. When Mr. Denton was dressing for dinner, and took stock of his room, in which there was a large amount of the chintz displayed, he congratulated himself over and over again on the luck which had first made him forget his aunt's commission, and had then put into his hands this extremely effective means of remedying his mistake. The pattern was, as he said at dinner, so restful, and yet so far from being dull, and Miss Denton, who, by the way, had none of the stuff in her own room, was much disposed to agree with him. At breakfast next morning he was induced to qualify his satisfaction to some extent, but very slightly. "There is one thing I rather regret," he said, "that we allowed them to join up the vertical bands of the pattern at the top. I think it would have been better to leave that alone." "Oh?" said his aunt interrogatively. "Yes. As I was reading in bed last night, they kept catching my eye, rather. That is, I found myself looking across at them every now and then. There was an effect as if someone kept peeping out between the curtains in one place or another, where there was no edge, and I think that was due to the joining up of the bands at the top. The only other thing that troubled me was the wind." "Why, I thought it was a perfectly still night." Perhaps it was only on my side of the house, but there was enough to sway my curtains and rustle them more than I wanted. That night a bachelor friend of James Denton's came to stay, and was lodged in a room on the same floor as his host, but at the end of a long passage, halfway down which was a red baize door, put there to cut off the draught and intercept noise. The party of 3 had separated. Miss Denton, a good first, the 2 men at about 11. James Denton, not yet inclined for bed, sat him down in an armchair and read for a time. Then he dozed, and then he woke, and bethought himself that his brown spaniel, which ordinarily slept in his room, had not come upstairs with him. Then he thought he was mistaken, for, happening to move his hand, which hung down over the arm of the chair, within a few inches of the floor, he felt on the back of it just the slightest touch of a surface of hair, and stretching it out in that direction, he stroked and patted a rounded something. But the feel of it, and still more the fact that, instead of a responsive movement, absolute stillness greeted his touch, made him look over the arm. What he had been touching rose to meet him. It was in the attitude of one that had crept along the floor on its belly, and it was, so far as could be collected, a human figure, but of the face which was now rising to within a few inches of his own, no feature was discernible, only hair. Shapeless as it was, there was about it so horrible an air of menace that, as he bounded from his chair and rushed from the room, he heard himself moaning with fear, and doubtless he did right to fly. As he dashed into the baize door that cut the passage in two, and, forgetting that it opened towards him, beat against it with all the force in him, he felt a soft, ineffectual tearing at his back, which, all the same, seemed to be growing in power, as if the hand, or whatever worse than a hand was there, were becoming more material as the pursuer's rage was more concentrated. Then he remembered the trick of the door. He got it open. He shut it behind him. He gained his friend's room, and that is all we need know. It seems curious that during all the time that had elapsed since the purchase of Poynter's diary, James Denton should not have sought an explanation of the presence of the pattern that had been pinned into it. Well, he had read the diary through without finding it mentioned, and had concluded that there was nothing to be said. But on leaving Rendcombe Manor, he did not know whether for good, as he naturally insisted upon doing on the day after experiencing the horror I have tried to put into words, he took the diary with him, and at his seaside lodgings he examined more narrowly the portion whence the pattern had been taken. What he remembered having suspected about it turned out to be correct. 2 or 3 leaves were pasted together, but written upon, as was patent when they were held up to the light. They yielded easily to steaming, for the paste had lost much of its strength, and they contained something relevant to the pattern. The entry was made in 1707. Old Mr. Casbury of Accrington told me this day much of young Sir Everard Charlet, whom he remembered commoner of University College, and thought was of the same family as Dr. Arthur Charlet, now master of the college. This Charlet was a personable young gentleman, but a loose, atheistical companion, and a great lifter, as they then called the hard drinkers, and for what I know do so now. He was noted and subject to several censures at different times for his extravagancies, and if the full history of his debaucheries had been known, no doubt would have been expelled the college, supposing that no interest had been employed on his behalf, of which Mr. Casbury had some suspicion. He was a very beautiful person, and constantly wore his own hair, which was very abundant, from which, and his loose way of living, the cant name for him was Absalom, and he was accustomed to say that, indeed, he believed he had shortened old David's days, meaning his father, Sir Job Charlet, an old worthy cavalier. Note that Mr. Casbury said that he remembers not the year of Sir Everard Charlet's death, but it was 1692 or 3. He died suddenly in October. Several lines describing his unpleasant habits and reputed delinquencies are omitted. Having seen him in such topping spirits the night before, Mr. Casbury was amazed when he learned the death. He was found in the town ditch. His hair was said plucked clean off his head. Most bells in Oxford rung out for him, being a nobleman, and he was buried next night in St. Peter's in the East. But 2 years after, being to be moved to his country estate by his successor, it was said the coffin, breaking by mischance, proved quite full of hair, which sounds fabulous, but yet I believe precedents are upon record, as in Dr. Plott's History of Staffordshire. His chambers being afterwards stripped, Mr. Casbury came by part of the hangings of it, which, 'twas said, this Charlotte had designed expressly for a memorial of his hair, giving the fellow that drew it a lock to work by, and the piece which I have fastened in here was parcel of the same, which Mr. Casbury gave to me. He said he believed there was a subtlety in the drawing, but had never discovered it himself, nor much liked to pore upon it. The money spent upon the curtains might as well have been thrown into the fire, as they were. Mr. Cattell's comment upon what he heard of the story took the form of a quotation from Shakespeare. You may guess it without difficulty. It began with the words, "There are more things." End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of A Thin Ghost and Others by M.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Peter Yearsley. An episode of cathedral history. There was once a learned gentleman who was deputed to examine and report upon the archives of the Cathedral of Southminster. The examination of these records demanded a very considerable expenditure of time. Hence it became advisable for him to engage lodgings in the city, for though the cathedral body were profuse in their offers of hospitality, Mr. Lake felt that he would prefer to be master of his day. This was recognised as reasonable. The Dean eventually wrote advising Mr. Lake, if he were not already suited, to communicate with Mr. Worby, the principal verger, who occupied a house convenient to the church, and was prepared to take in a quiet lodger for 3 or 4 weeks. Such an arrangement was precisely what Mr. Lake desired. Terms were easily agreed upon, and early in December, like another Mr. Datchery, as he remarked to himself, the investigator found himself in the occupation of a very comfortable room in an ancient and cathedraly house. One so familiar with the customs of cathedral churches, and treated with such obvious consideration by the Dean and Chapter of this cathedral in particular, could not fail to command the respect of the head verger. Mr. Worby even acquiesced in certain modifications of statements he had been accustomed to offer for years to parties of visitors. Mr. Lake, on his part, found the verger a very cheery companion, and took advantage of any occasion that presented itself for enjoying his conversation when the day's work was over. One evening, about 9 o'clock, Mr. Worby knocked at his lodger's door. "I've occasion," he said, "to go across to the cathedral, Mr. Lake, and I think I made you a promise when I did so next I would give you the opportunity to see what it looks like at night time. It is quite fine and dry outside, if you care to come." "To be sure I will. Very much obliged to you, Mr. Worby, for thinking of it. But let me get my coat." "Here it is, sir, and I've another lantern here that you'll find advisable for the steps, as there's no moon." "Anyone might think we were Jasper and Durdles over again, mightn't they?" said Lake, as they crossed the close, for he had ascertained that the verger had read Edwin Drood. "Well, so they might," said Mr. Worby with a short laugh, "though I don't know whether we ought to take it as a compliment. Odd ways, I often think, they had at that cathedral. Don't it seem so to you, sir? Full choral matins at 7 o'clock in the morning, all the year round. Wouldn't suit our boys' voices nowadays, and I think there's 1 or 2 of the men would be applying for a rise if the chapter was to bring it in, particularly the altos." They were now at the south-west door. As Mr. Worby was unlocking it, Lake said, "Did you ever find anyone locked in here by accident?" "Twice I did. Once was a drunk sailor. However he got in I don't know. I suppose he went to sleep in the service, but by the time I got to him he was praying fit to bring the roof in. Lord, what a noise that man did make. Said it was the first time he'd been inside a church for 10 years, and blessed if ever he'd try it again. The other was an old sheep. Them boys it was up to their games. That was the last time they tried it on, though. There, sir, now you see what we look like. Our late Dean used now and again to bring parties in, but he preferred a moonlight night. And there was a piece of verse he'd quote to 'em, relating to a Scotch cathedral, I understand, but I don't know. I almost think the effect's better when it's all dark-like. Seems to add to the size and height. Now, if you won't mind stopping somewhere in the nave while I go up into the choir where my business lays, you'll see what I mean. Accordingly, Lake waited, leaning against a pillar, and watched the light wavering along the length of the church and up the steps into the choir, until it was intercepted by some screen or other furniture, which only allowed the reflection to be seen on the piers and roof. Not many minutes had passed before Worby reappeared at the door of the choir, and, by waving his lantern, signalled to Lake to rejoin him. I suppose it is Worby, and not a substitute, thought Lake to himself as he walked up the nave. There was, in fact, nothing untoward. Worby showed him the papers which he had come to fetch out of the Dean's stall, and asked him what he thought of the spectacle. Lake agreed that it was well worth seeing. I suppose, he said, as they walked towards the altar steps together, that you're too much used to going about here at night to feel nervous. But you must get a start every now and then, don't you, when a book falls down or a door swings to? No, Mr. Lake, I can't say I think much about noises, not nowadays. I'm much more afraid of finding an escape of gas or a burst in the stovepipes than anything else. Still, there have been times, years ago. Did you notice that plain altar tomb there? 15th century, we say it is. I don't know if you agree to that. Well, if you didn't look at it, just come back and give it a glance, if you'd be so good. It was on the north side of the choir, and rather awkwardly placed, only about 3 feet from the enclosing stone screen. Quite plain, as the verger had said, but for some ordinary stone panelling. A metal cross of some size on the northern side, that, next to the screen, was the solitary feature of any interest. Lake agreed that it was not earlier than the Perpendicular period. But, he said, unless it's the tomb of some remarkable person, you'll forgive me for saying that I don't think it's particularly noteworthy. Well, I can't say as it is the tomb of anybody noted in history, said Worby, who had a dry smile on his face, for we don't own any record whatsoever of who it was put up to. For all that, if you've half an hour to spare, sir, when we get back to the house, Mr. Lake, I should tell you a tale about that tomb. I won't begin on it now. It strikes cold here, and we don't want to be dawdling about all night. Of course, I should like to hear it immensely. Very well, sir, you shall. Now, if I might put a question to you, he went on, as they passed down the choir aisle. In our little local guide, and not only there, but in the little book on our cathedral in the series, you'll find it stated that this portion of the building was erected previous to the 12th century. Now, of course, I should be glad enough to take that view, but, mind a step, sir, but I put it to you, does the lay of the stone here in this portion of the wall, which he tapped with his key, does it, to your eye, carry the flavour of what you might call Saxon masonry? No, I thought not. No more it does to me. Now, if you'll believe me, I've said as much to those men. One's the librarian of our free library here, and the other came down from London on purpose, 50 times if I have once, but I might just as well have talked to that bit of stonework. But there it is, I suppose everyone's got their opinions. The discussion of this peculiar trait of human nature occupied Mr. Worby almost up to the moment when he and Lake re-entered the former's house. The condition of the fire in Lake's sitting-room led to a suggestion from Mr. Worby that they should finish the evening in his own parlour. We find them, accordingly, settled there some short time afterwards. Mr. Worby made his story a long one, and I will not undertake to tell it wholly in his own words or in his own order. Lake committed the substance of it to paper immediately after hearing it, together with some few passages of the narrative which had fixed themselves verbatim in his mind.
I shall probably find it expedient to condense Lake's record to some extent. Mr. Worby was born, it appeared, about the year 1828. His father before him had been connected with the cathedral, and likewise his grandfather. One or both had been choristers, and in later life both had done work as mason and carpenter, respectively, about the fabric. Worby himself, though possessed, as he frankly acknowledged, of an indifferent voice, had been drafted into the choir at about 10 years of age. It was in 1840 that the wave of the Gothic revival smote the cathedral of Southminster. "There was a lot of lovely stuff went then, sir," said Worby with a sigh. "My father couldn't hardly believe it when he got his orders to clear out the choir. There was a new dean just come in, Dean Burscuff it was, and my father had been prenticed to a good firm of joiners in the city, and knew what good work was when he saw it. Cruel it was, he used to say, all that beautiful wainscot oak, as good as the day it was put up, and garlands like of foliage and fruit, and lovely old gilding work on the coats of arms and the organ pipes. All went to the timber yard, every bit, except some little pieces worked up in the Lady Chapel, and here in this overmantel. Well, I may be mistook, but I say our choir never looked as well since. Still, there was a lot found out about the history of the church, and no doubt but what it did stand in need of repair. There was very few winters passed but what we'd lose a pinnacle." Mr. Lake expressed his concurrence with Worby's views of restoration, but owns to a fear about this point, lest the story proper should never be reached. Possibly this was perceptible in his manner. Worby hastened to reassure him. "Not but what I could carry on about that topic for hours at a time, and do when I see my opportunity. But Dean Burscuff, he was very set on the Gothic period, and nothing would serve him, but everything must be made agreeable to that. And one morning after service he appointed for my father to meet him in the choir, and he came back after he'd taken off his robes in the vestry, and he'd got a roll of paper with him, and the verger that was then brought in a table, and they begun spreading it out on the table with prayer books to keep it down, and my father helped 'em, and he saw it was a picture of the inside of a choir in a cathedral, and the dean, he was a quick-spoken gentleman, he says, 'Well, Worby, what do you think of that?' 'Why,' says my father, 'I don't think I have the pleasure of knowing that view. Would that be Hereford Cathedral, Mr. Dean?' 'No, Worby,' says the dean, 'that's Southminster Cathedral, as we hope to see it before many years.' 'Indeed, sir,' says my father, and that was all he did say, leastways to the dean, but he used to tell me he felt really faint in himself when he looked round our choir, as I can remember it, all comfortable and furnished like, and then see this nasty little dry picture, as he called it, drawn out by some London architect. Well, there I am again, but you'll see what I mean if you look at this old view." Worby reached down a framed print from the wall. "Well, the long and the short of it was that the dean, he handed over to my father a copy of an order of the chapter that he was to clear out every bit of the choir, make a clean sweep, ready for the new work that was being designed up in town, and he was to put it in hand as soon as ever he could get the breakers together. Now then, sir, if you look at that view, you'll see where the pulpit used to stand. That's what I want you to notice, if you please." It was indeed easily seen, an unusually large structure of timber with a domed sounding board, standing at the east end of the stalls on the north side of the choir, facing the bishop's throne. Worby proceeded to explain that during the alterations services were held in the nave, the members of the choir being thereby disappointed of an anticipated holiday, and the organist in particular incurring the suspicion of having wilfully damaged the mechanism of the temporary organ that was hired at considerable expense from London. The work of demolition began with the choir screen and organ loft, and proceeded gradually eastwards, disclosing, as Worby said, many interesting features of older work. While this was going on, the members of the chapter were, naturally, in and about the choir a great deal, and it soon became apparent to the elder Worby, who could not help overhearing some of their talk, that, on the part of the senior canons especially, there must have been a good deal of disagreement before the policy now being carried out had been adopted. Some were of opinion that they should catch their deaths of cold in the return stalls, unprotected by a screen from the draughts in the nave. Others objected to being exposed to the view of persons in the choir aisles, especially, they said, during the sermons, when they found it helpful to listen in a posture which was liable to misconstruction. The strongest opposition, however, came from the oldest of the body, who, up to the last moment, objected to the removal of the pulpit. "You ought not to touch it, Mr. Dean," he said, with great emphasis, one morning when the two were standing before it. "You don't know what mischief you may do." "Mischief? It's not a work of any particular merit, Canon." "Don't call me Canon," said the old man with great asperity. "That is, for 30 years I've been known as Dr. Aloff, and I shall be obliged, Mr. Dean, if you would kindly humour me in that matter. And as to the pulpit, which I've preached from for 30 years, though I don't insist on that, all I'll say is I know you're doing wrong in moving it." "But what sense could there be, my dear doctor, in leaving it where it is, when we're fitting up the rest of the choir in a totally different style? What reason could be given, apart from the look of the thing?" "Reason? Reason?" said old Dr. Aloff. "If you young men, if I may say so without any disrespect, Mr. Dean, if you'd only listen to reason a little, and not be always asking for it, we should get on better. But there, I've said my say." The old gentleman hobbled off, and, as it proved, never entered the cathedral again. The season, it was a hot summer, turned sickly on a sudden. Dr. Aloff was one of the first to go, with some affection of the muscles of the thorax, which took him painfully at night, and at many services the number of choirmen and boys was very thin. Meanwhile the pulpit had been done away with. In fact, the sounding board, part of which still exists as a table in a summer house in the palace garden, was taken down within an hour or two of Dr. Aloff's protest. The removal of the base, not effected without considerable trouble, disclosed to view, greatly to the exultation of the restoring party, an altar tomb, the tomb, of course, to which Worby had attracted Lake's attention that same evening. Much fruitless research was expended in attempts to identify the occupant. From that day to this he has never had a name put to him. The structure had been most carefully boxed in under the pulpit base, so that such slight ornament as it possessed was not defaced. Only on the north side of it there was what looked like an injury, a gap between two of the slabs composing the side. It might be 2 or 3 inches across. Palmer, the mason, was directed to fill it up in a week's time, when he came to do some other small jobs near that part of the choir. The season was undoubtedly a very trying one. Whether the church was built on a site that had once been a marsh, as was suggested, or for whatever reason, the residents in its immediate neighbourhood had, many of them, but little enjoyment of the exquisite sunny days and the calm nights of August and September. To several of the older people, Dr. Aloff among others, as we have seen, the summer proved downright fatal. But even among the younger, few escaped either a sojourn in bed for a matter of weeks, or at the least a brooding sense of oppression, accompanied by hateful nightmares. Gradually there formulated itself a suspicion, which grew into a conviction, that the alterations in the cathedral had something to say in the matter. The widow of a former old verger, a pensioner of the chapter of Southminster, was visited by dreams, which she retailed to her friends, of a shape that slipped out of the little door of the south transept as the dark fell in, and flitted, taking a fresh direction every night, about the close, disappearing for a while in house after house, and finally emerging again when the night sky was paling. She could see nothing of it, she said, but that it was a moving form. Only she had an impression that when it returned to the church, as it seemed to do in the end of the dream, it turned its head, and then, she could not tell why, but she thought it had red eyes. Worby remembered hearing the old lady tell this dream at a tea-party in the house of the chapter clerk. Its recurrence might perhaps, he said, be taken as a symptom of approaching illness. At any rate, before the end of September, the old lady was in her grave. The interest excited by the restoration of this great church was not confined to its own county. One day that summer, an FSA of some celebrity visited the place. His business was to write an account of the discoveries that had been made for the Society of Antiquaries, and his wife, who accompanied him, was to make a series of illustrative drawings for his report. In the morning she employed herself in making a general sketch of the choir. In the afternoon she devoted herself to details. She first drew the newly exposed altar tomb, and when that was finished, she called her husband's attention to a beautiful piece of diaper ornament on the screen just behind it, which had, like the tomb itself, been completely concealed by the pulpit. Of course, he said, an illustration of that must be made. So she seated herself on the tomb and began a careful drawing, which occupied her till dusk. Her husband had by this time finished his work of measuring and description, and they agreed that it was time to be getting back to their hotel. "You may as well brush my skirt, Frank," said the lady. "It must have got covered with dust, I'm sure." He obeyed dutifully, but after a moment he said, "I don't know whether you value this dress particularly, my dear, but I'm inclined to think it's seen its best days. There's a great bit of it gone." "Gone? Where?" said she. "I don't know where it's gone, but it's off at the bottom edge behind here." She pulled it hastily into sight, and was horrified to find a jagged tear extending some way into the substance of the stuff. Very much, she said, as if a dog had rent it away. The dress was, in any case, hopelessly spoilt, to her great vexation, and though they looked everywhere, the missing piece could not be found. There were many ways, they concluded, in which the injury might have come about, for the choir was full of old bits of woodwork with nails sticking out of them. Finally, they could only suppose that one of these had caused the mischief, and that the workman, who had been about all day, had carried off the particular piece, with the fragment of dress still attached to it. It was about this time, Worby thought, that his little dog began to wear an anxious expression when the hour for it to be put into the shed in the back yard approached, for his mother had ordained that it must not sleep in the house. One evening, he said, when he was just going to pick it up and carry it out, it looked at him like a Christian, and waved its hand, I was going to say. Well, you know how they do carry on sometimes. And the end of it was I put it under my coat and huddled it upstairs, and I'm afraid I as good as deceived my poor mother on the subject. After that the dog acted very artful, with hiding itself under the bed for half an hour or more before bedtime came, and we worked it so as my mother never found out what we'd done. Of course, Worby was glad of its company anyhow, but more particularly when the nuisance that is still remembered in Southminster as the crying set in. Night after night, said Worby, that dog seemed to know it was coming. He'd creep out, he would, and snuggle into the bed and cuddle right up to me, shivering, and when the crying come, he'd be like a wild thing, shoving his head under my arm, and I was fully near as bad. 6 or 7 times we'd hear it, not more, and when he'd draw out his head again, I'd know it was over for that night. What was it like, sir? Well, I never heard but one thing that seemed to hit it off. I happened to be playing about in the close, and there was 2 of the canons met and said good morning one to another. Sleep well last night, says one. It was Mr. Henslow, that one, and Mr. Lyall was the other. Can't say I did, says Mr. Lyall. Rather too much of Isaiah 34:14 for me. 34:14, says Mr. Henslow. What's that? You call yourself a Bible reader, says Mr. Lyall. Mr. Henslow, you must know, he was one of what used to be termed Simeon's lot, pretty much what we should call the evangelical party. You go and look it up. I wanted to know what he was getting at myself, and so off I ran home and got out my own Bible, and there it was. The satyr shall cry to his fellow. Well, I thought, is that what we've been listening to these past nights? And I tell you, it made me look over my shoulder a time or two. Of course, I'd asked my father and mother about what it could be before that, but they both said it was most likely cats, but they spoke very short, and I could see they was troubled. My word, that was a noise, hungry like, as if it was calling after someone that wouldn't come. If ever you felt you wanted company, it would be when you was waiting for it to begin again. I believe 2 or 3 nights there was men put on to watch in different parts of the close, but they all used to get together in one corner, the nearest they could to the High Street, and nothing came of it. Well, the next thing was this. Me and another of the boys, he's in business in the city now as a grocer, like his father before him. We'd gone up in the close after morning service was over, and we heard old Palmer, the mason, bellowing to some of his men. So we went up nearer, because we knew he was a rusty old chap, and there might be some fun going. It appears Palmer'd told this man to stop up the chink in that old tomb. Well, there was this man keeping on saying he'd done it the best he could, and there was Palmer carrying on like all possessed about it. "Call that making a job of it?" he says. "If you had your rights you'd get the sack for this. What do you suppose I pay you your wages for? What do you suppose I'm going to say to the Dean and Chapter when they come round? As come they may do at any time. And see where you've been bungling about, covering the old place with mess and plaster and Lord knows what." "Well, master, I done the best I could," says the man. "I don't know no more than what you do, how it come to fall out this way. I tamped it right in the hole," he says, "and how it's fell out," he says, "I never see." "Fell out?" says old Palmer. "Why, it's nowhere near the place. Blowed out, you mean." And he picked up a piece of plaster, and so did I, that was laying up against the screen, 3 or 4 feet off, and not dry yet. And old Palmer, he looked at it curious like, and then he turned round on me, and he says, "Now then, you boys, have you been up to some of your games here?" "No," I says, "I haven't, Mr. Palmer. There's none of us been about here till just this minute." And while I was talking, the other boy, Evans, he got looking in through the chink, and I heard him draw in his breath, and he came away sharp and up to us, and, says he, "I believe there's something in there. I saw something shiny." "What? I dare say," says old Palmer. "Well, I ain't got time to stop about there. You, William, you go off and get some more stuff and make a job of it this time. If not, there'll be trouble in my yard," he says. So the man, he went off, and Palmer too, and us boys stopped behind, and I says to Evans, "Did you really see anything in there?" "Yes," he says, "I did indeed." So then I says, "Let's shove something in and stir it up." And we tried several of the bits of wood that was laying about, but they were all too big. Then Evans, he had a sheet of music he'd brought with him, an anthem or a service, I forget which it was now, and he rolled it up small and shoved it in the chink. 2 or 3 times he did it, and nothing happened. "Give it me, boy," I said, and I had a try. No, nothing happened. Then, I don't know why I thought of it, I'm sure, but I stooped down just opposite the chink and put my 2 fingers in my mouth and whistled, you know the way, and at that I seemed to think I heard something stirring, and I says to Evans, "Come away," I says, "I don't like this." "Oh, rot," he says, "give me that roll," and he took it and shoved it in. And I don't think I ever see anyone go so pale as he did. "I say, Worby," he says, "it's caught, or else someone's got hold of it." "Pull it out or leave it," I says. "Come, and let's get off." So he gave a good pull, and it came away. Leastways, most of it did, but the end was gone. Torn off it was, and Evans looked at it for a second, and then he gave a sort of a croak and let it drop, and we both made off out of there as quick as ever we could. When we got outside, Evans says to me, "Did you see the end of that paper?" "No," I says, "only it was torn." "Yes, it was," he says, "but it was wet too, and black." Well, partly because of the fright we had, and partly because that music was wanted in a day or 2, and we knew there'd be a set-up about it with the organist, we didn't say nothing to anyone else, and I suppose the workmen, they swept up the bit that was left along with the rest of the rubbish. But Evans, if you was to ask him this very day about it, he'd stick to it. He saw that paper wet and black at the end where it was torn. After that the boys gave the choir a wide berth, so that Worby was not sure what was the result of the mason's renewed mending of the tomb. Only he made out, from fragments of conversation dropped by the workmen passing through the choir, that some difficulty had been met with, and that the governor, Mr. Palmer to wit, had tried his own hand at the job. A little later he happened to see Mr. Palmer himself knocking at the door of the deanery and being admitted by the butler. A day or so after that he gathered from a remark his father let fall at breakfast that something a little out of the common was to be done in the cathedral after morning service on the morrow. And I'd just as soon it was today, his father added. I don't see the use of running risks. Father, I says, what are you going to do in the cathedral tomorrow? And he turned on me as savage as I ever see him. He was a wonderful good-tempered man as a general thing, my poor father was. My lad, he says, I'll trouble you not to go picking up your elders and betters' talk. It's not manners and it's not straight. What I'm going to do or not going to do in the cathedral tomorrow is none of your business. And if I catch sight of you hanging about the place tomorrow after your work's done, I'll send you home with a flea in your ear. Now you mind that. Of course I said I was very sorry and that, and equally of course I went off and laid my plans with Evans. We knew there was a stair up in the corner of the transept, which you can get up to the triforium, and in them days the door to it was pretty well always open, and even if it wasn't, we knew the key usually laid under a bit of matting hard by. So we made up our minds we'd be putting away music and that next morning while the rest of the boys was clearing off, and then slip up the stairs and watch from the triforium if there was any signs of work going on. Well, that same night I dropped off asleep as sound as a boy does, and all of a sudden the dog woke me up, coming into the bed, and thought I, now we're going to get it sharp, for he seemed more frightened than usual. After about 5 minutes, sure enough, came this cry. I can't give you no idea what it was like, and so near too, nearer than I'd heard it yet. And a funny thing, Mr. Lake, you know what a place this close is for an echo, and particular if you stand this side of it. Well, this crying never made no sign of an echo at all, but as I said, it was dreadful near this night. And on the top of the start I got with hearing it, I got another fright, for I heard something rustling outside in the passage. Now, to be sure, I thought I was done, but I noticed the dog seemed to perk up a bit, and next there was someone whispered outside the door, and I very near laughed out loud, for I knew it was my father and mother that had got out of bed with the noise. Whatever is it? Says my mother. Hush, I don't know, says my father, excited like. Don't disturb the boy. I hope he didn't hear nothing. So, me knowing they was just outside, it made me bolder, and I slipped out of my bed across to my little window, giving on the close. But the dog, he bored right down to the bottom of the bed, and I looked out. First go off, I couldn't see anything. Then, right down in the shadow, under a buttress, I made out what I shall always say was 2 spots of red, a dull red it was, nothing like a lamp or a fire, but just so as you could pick 'em out of the black shadow. I hadn't but just sighted 'em when it seemed we wasn't the only people that had been disturbed, because I see a window in a house on the left-hand side become lighted up, and the light moving. I just turned my head to make sure of it, and then looked back into the shadow for those 2 red things, and they was gone, and for all I peered about and stared, there was not a sign more of them. Then come my last fright that night. Something come against my bare leg, but that was all right. That was my little dog that had come out of bed, and prancing about, making a great to-do, only holding his tongue, and me seeing he was quite in spirits again, I took him back to bed, and we slept the night out. Next morning I made out to tell my mother I'd had the dog in my room, and I was surprised, after all she'd said about it before, how quiet she took it. Did you? She says. Well, by good rights, you ought to go without your breakfast for doing such a thing behind my back, but I don't know as there's any great harm done. Only another time you ask my permission, do you hear? A bit after that I said something to my father about having heard the cats again. Cats? He says, and he looked over at my poor mother, and she coughed, and he says, yes, cats, I believe I heard 'em myself. That was a funny morning altogether. Nothing seemed to go right. The organist, he stopped in bed, and the minor canon, he forgot it was the 19th day, and waited for the venite, and after a bit the deputy, he set off playing the chant for evensong, which was a minor, and then the Decani boys were laughing so much they couldn't sing, and when it came to the anthem, the solo boy, he got took with the giggles, and made out his nose was bleeding, and shoved the book at me, what hadn't practised the verse, and wasn't much of a singer, if I had known it. Well, things was rougher, you see, 50 years ago, and I got a nip from the counter-tenor behind me that I remembered. So we got through somehow, and neither the men nor the boys weren't by way of waiting to see whether the canon in residence, Mr. Henslow it was, would come to the vestries and fine 'em, but I don't believe he did. For one thing, I fancy he'd read the wrong lesson for the first time in his life, and knew it.
Anyhow, Evans and me didn't find no difficulty in slipping up the stairs, as I told you, and when we got up, we laid ourselves down flat on our stomachs, where we could just stretch our heads out over the old tomb, and we hadn't but just done so when we heard the verger that was then first shutting the iron porch gates and locking the south-west door, and then the transept door, so we knew there was something up, and they meant to keep the public out for a bit. Next thing was, the Dean and the Canon come in by their door on the north, and then I see my father and old Palmer and a couple of their best men, and Palmer stood a-talking for a bit with the Dean in the middle of the choir. He had a coil of rope, and the men had crows. All of them looked a bit nervous. So there they stood talking, and at last I heard the Dean say, "Well, I've no time to waste, Palmer. If you think this'll satisfy Southminster people, I'll permit it to be done. But I must say this, that never in the whole course of my life have I heard such arrant nonsense from a practical man as I have from you. Don't you agree with me, Henslow?" As far as I could hear, Mr. Henslow said something like, "Oh, well, we're told, aren't we, Mr. Dean, not to judge others?" And the Dean, he gave a kind of sniff, and walked straight up to the tomb, and took his stand behind it, with his back to the screen, and the others, they came edging up rather gingerly. Henslow, he stopped on the south side, and scratched on his chin, he did. Then the Dean spoke up. "Palmer," he says, "which can you do easiest, get the slab off the top, or shift one of the side slabs?" Old Palmer and his men, they pottered about a bit, looking round the edge of the top slab, and sounding the sides on the south and east and west, and everywhere but the north. Henslow said something about it being better to have a try at the south side, because there was more light and more room to move about in. Then my father, who'd been watching of them, went round to the north side, and knelt down and felt of the slab by the chink, and he got up and dusted his knees, and says to the Dean, "Beg pardon, Mr. Dean, but I think if Mr. Palmer'll try this here slab, he'll find it'll come out easy enough. Seems to me one of the men could prise it out with his crow by means of this chink." "Ah, thank you, Worby," says the Dean. "That's a good suggestion. Palmer, let one of your men do that, will you?" So the man come round and put his bar in and bore on it, and just that minute when they were all bending over, and we boys got our heads well out over the edge of the triforium, there come a most fearful crash down at the west end of the choir, as if a whole stack of big timber had fallen down a flight of stairs. Well, you can't expect me to tell you everything that happened all in a minute. Of course there was a terrible commotion. I heard the slab fall out and the crowbar on the floor, and I heard the Dean say, "Good God!" When I looked down again, I saw the Dean tumbled over on the floor, the men was making off down the choir, Henslow was just going to help the Dean up, Palmer was going to stop the men, as he said afterwards, and my father was sitting on the altar step with his face in his hands. The Dean, he was very cross. "I wish to goodness you'd look where you're coming to, Henslow," he says. "Why you should all take to your heels when a stick of wood tumbles down, I cannot imagine." And all Henslow could do, explaining he was right away on the other side of the tomb, would not satisfy him. Then Palmer came back and reported there was nothing to account for this noise, and nothing seemingly fallen down. And when the Dean finished feeling of himself, they gathered round, except my father. He sat where he was, and someone lighted up a bit of candle, and they looked into the tomb. "Nothing there," says the Dean. "What did I tell you? Stay, here's something. What's this? A bit of music paper and a piece of torn stuff, part of a dress it looks like, both quite modern, no interest whatever. Another time perhaps you'll take the advice of an educated man," or something like that, and off he went, limping a bit, and out through the north door. Only, as he went, he called back angry to Palmer for leaving the door standing open. Palmer called out, "Very sorry, sir," but he shrugged his shoulders, and Henslow says, "I fancy Mr. Dean's mistaken. I closed the door behind me, but he's a little upset." Then Palmer says, "Why, where's Worby?" And they saw him sitting on the step and went up to him. He was recovering himself, it seemed, and wiping his forehead, and Palmer helped him up onto his legs, as I was glad to see. They were too far off for me to hear what they said, but my father pointed to the north door in the aisle, and Palmer and Henslow, both of them looked very surprised and scared. After a bit, my father and Henslow went out of the church, and the others made what haste they could to put the slab back and plaster it in. And about as the clock struck 12, the cathedral was opened again, and us boys made the best of our way home. I was in a great taking to know what it was had given my poor father such a turn, and when I got in and found him sitting in his chair, taking a glass of spirits, and my mother standing looking anxious at him, I couldn't keep from bursting out and making confession where I'd been. But he didn't seem to take on, not in the way of losing his temper. You was there, was you? Well, did you see it? I seed everything, father, I said, except where the noise came. Did you see what it was knocked the Dean over, he says, that what come out of the monument? You didn't? Well, that's a mercy. Why, what was it, father? I said. Come, you must have seen it, he says. Didn't you see? A thing like a man, all over hair and two great eyes to it. Well, that was all I could get out of him that time, and later on he seemed as if he was ashamed of being so frightened, and he used to put me off when I asked him about it. But years after, when I was got to be a grown man, we had more talk now and again on the matter, and he always said the same thing. Black it was, he'd say, and a mass of hair and two legs, and the light caught on its eyes. Well, that's the tale of that tomb, Mr. Lake. It's one we don't tell to our visitors, and I should be obliged to you not to make any use of it till I'm out of the way. I doubt Mr. Evans'll feel the same as I do, if you ask him. This proved to be the case, but over 20 years have passed by, and the grass is growing over both Worby and Evans, so Mr. Lake felt no difficulty about communicating his notes, taken in 1890, to me. He accompanied them with a sketch of the tomb and a copy of the short inscription on the metal cross which was affixed at the expense of Dr. Lyall to the centre of the northern side. It was from the Vulgate of Isaiah, verse 34, and consisted merely of the 3 words, Ibi cubavit lamia. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of A Thin Ghost and Others by M.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Yearsley. The story of a disappearance and an appearance. The letters which I now publish were sent to me recently by a person who knows me to be interested in ghost stories. There is no doubt about their authenticity. The paper on which they are written, the ink, and the whole external aspect put their date beyond the reach of question. The only point which they do not make clear is the identity of the writer. He signs with initials only, and as none of the envelopes of the letters are preserved, the surname of his correspondent, obviously a married brother, is as obscure as his own. No further preliminary explanation is needed, I think. Luckily, the first letter supplies all that could be expected. Letter 1. Great Chrysthall, December the 22nd, 1837. My dear Robert, it is with great regret for the enjoyment I am losing, and for a reason which you will deplore equally with myself, that I write to inform you that I am unable to join your circle for this Christmas. But you will agree with me that it is unavoidable when I say that I have, within these few hours, received a letter from Mrs. Hunt at B—, to the effect that our Uncle Henry has suddenly and mysteriously disappeared, and begging me to go down there immediately and join the search that is being made for him. Little as I, or you either, I think, have ever seen of Uncle, I naturally feel that this is not a request that can be regarded lightly, and accordingly I propose to go to B— by this afternoon's mail, reaching it late in the evening. I shall not go to the rectory, but put up at the King's Head, and to which you may address letters. I enclose a small draft, which you will please make use of for the benefit of the young people. I shall write to you daily, supposing me to be detained more than a single day, what goes on, and you may be sure, should the business be cleared up in time to permit of my coming to the Manor after all, I shall present myself. I have but a few minutes at disposal. With cordial greetings to you all, and many regrets, believe me, your affectionate brother, W.R. Letter 2. King's Head, December the 23rd, 37. My dear Robert, in the first place, there is as yet no news of Uncle H., and I think you may finally dismiss any idea, I won't say hope, that I might, after all, turn up for Christmas. However, my thoughts will be with you, and you have my best wishes for a really festive day. Mind that none of my nephews or nieces expend any fraction of their guineas on presents for me. Since I got here I have been blaming myself for taking this affair of Uncle H. too easily. From what people here say, I gather that there is very little hope that he can still be alive, but whether it is accident or design that carried him off I cannot judge. The facts are these. On Friday the 19th, he went as usual shortly before 5 o'clock to read evening prayers at the church, and when they were over, the clerk brought him a message, in response to which he set off to pay a visit to a sick person at an outlying cottage, the better part of 2 miles away. He paid the visit, and started on his return journey at about 6:30. This is the last that is known of him. The people here are very much grieved at his loss. He had been here many years, as you know, and though, as you also know, he was not the most genial of men, and had more than a little of the martinet in his composition, he seems to have been active in good works, and unsparing of trouble to himself. Poor Mrs. Hunt, who has been his housekeeper ever since she left Woodley, is quite overcome. It seems like the end of the world to her. I am glad that I did not entertain the idea of taking quarters at the rectory, and I have declined several kindly offers of hospitality from people in the place, preferring as I do to be independent, and finding myself very comfortable here. You will, of course, wish to know what has been done in the way of inquiry and search. First, nothing was to be expected from investigation at the rectory, and, to be brief, nothing has transpired. I asked Mrs. Hunt, as others had done before, whether there was either any unfavourable symptom in her master, such as might portend a sudden stroke or attack of illness, or whether he had ever had reason to apprehend any such thing. But both she and also his medical man were clear that this was not the case. He was quite in his usual health. In the second place, naturally, ponds and streams have been dragged, and fields in the neighbourhood which he is known to have visited last have been searched without result. I have myself talked to the parish clerk, and, more important, have been to the house where he paid his visit. There can be no question of any foul play on these people's part. The one man in the house is ill in bed and very weak. The wife and the children, of course, could do nothing themselves, nor is there the shadow of a probability that they or any of them should have agreed to decoy poor Uncle H. out in order that he might be attacked on the way back. They had told what they knew to several other inquirers already, but the woman repeated it to me. The rector was looking just as usual. He wasn't very long with the sick man. He ain't, she said, like some what has a gift in prayer. But there, if we was all that way, however would the chapel people get their living? He left some money when he went away, and one of the children saw him cross the stile into the next field. He was dressed as he always was, wore his bands. I gather he is nearly the last man remaining who does so, at any rate in this district. You see, I am putting down everything. The fact is that I have nothing else to do, having brought no business papers with me, and moreover it serves to clear my own mind, and may suggest points which have been overlooked. So I shall continue to write all that passes, even to conversations if need be. You may read or not as you please, but pray keep the letters. I have another reason for writing so fully, but it is not a very tangible one. You may ask if I have myself made any search in the fields near the cottage. Something, a good deal, has been done by others, as I mentioned, but I hope to go over the ground tomorrow. Bow Street has now been informed, and will send down by tonight's coach, but I do not think they will make much of the job. There is no snow, which might have helped us. The fields are all grass. Of course, I was on the qui-vive for any indication today, both going and returning, but there was a thick mist on the way back, and I was not in trim for wandering about unknown pastures, especially on an evening when bushes looked like men, and a cow lowing in the distance might have been the last trump. I assure you, if Uncle Henry had stepped out from among the trees in a little copse which borders the path at one place, carrying his head under his arm, I should have been very little more uncomfortable than I was. To tell you the truth, I was rather expecting something of the kind. But I must drop my pen for the moment. Mr. Lucas, the curate, is announced. Later. Mr. Lucas has been and gone, and there is not much beyond the decencies of ordinary sentiment to be got from him. I can see that he has given up any idea that the rector can be alive, and that, so far as he can be, he is truly sorry. I can also discern that, even in a more emotional person than Mr. Lucas, Uncle Henry was not likely to inspire strong attachment. Besides Mr. Lucas, I have had another visitor in the shape of my Boniface, mine host of the King's Head, who came to see whether I had everything I wished, and who really requires the pen of a Boz to do him justice. He was very solemn and weighty at first. "Well, sir," he said, "I suppose we must bow our head beneath the blow, as my poor wife had used to say. So far as I can gather, there's been neither hide nor yet hair of our late respected incumbent scented out as yet. Not that he was what the Scripture terms a hairy man in any sense of the word." I said, as well as I could, that I supposed not, but could not help adding that I had heard he was sometimes a little difficult to deal with. Mr. Bowman looked at me sharply for a moment, and then passed in a flash from solemn sympathy to impassioned declamation. "When I think," he said, "of the language that man see fit to employ to me in this here parlour over no more a matter than a cask of beer, such a thing as I told him might happen any day of the week to a man with a family, though as it turned out he was quite under a mistake, and that I knew at the time, only I was that shocked to hear him, I couldn't lay my tongue to the right expression." He stopped abruptly and eyed me with some embarrassment. I only said, "Dear me, I'm sorry to hear you had any little differences. I suppose my uncle will be a good deal missed in the parish?" Mr. Bowman drew a long breath. "Oh, yes," he said. "Your uncle. You'll understand me when I say that for the moment it has slipped my remembrance that he was a relative, and natural enough, I must say, as it should, for as to you bearing any resemblance to him, the notion of any such a thing is clean ridiculous. All the same, as I have bore it in my mind, you'll be among the first to feel, I'm sure, as I should have abstained my lips, or rather I should not have abstained my lips with no such reflections." I assured him that I quite understood, and was going to have asked him some further questions, but he was called away to see after some business. By the way, you need not take it into your head that he has anything to fear from the inquiry into poor Uncle Henry's disappearance, though no doubt in the watches of the night it will occur to him that I think he has, and I may expect explanations tomorrow. I must close this letter. It has to go by the late coach. Letter 3. December the 25th, 37. My dear Robert, this is a curious letter to be writing on Christmas Day, and yet, after all, there is nothing much in it. Or there may be. You shall be the judge. At least, nothing decisive. The Bow Street men practically say that they have no clue. The length of time and the weather conditions have made all tracks so faint as to be quite useless. Nothing that belonged to the dead man, I'm afraid no other word will do, has been picked up. As I expected, Mr. Bowman was uneasy in his mind this morning. Quite early I heard him holding forth in a very distinct voice, purposely so I thought, to the Bow Street officers in the bar, as to the loss that the town had sustained in their rector, and as to the necessity of leaving no stone unturned (he was very great on this phrase) in order to come at the truth. I suspect him of being an orator of repute at convivial meetings. When I was at breakfast he came to wait on me, and took an opportunity, when handing a muffin, to say in a low tone, "I hope, sir, you recognise as my feelings towards your relative is not actuated by any taint of what you may call malignity. You can leave the room, Eliza. I will see the gentleman has all he requires with my own hands. I ask your pardon, sir, but you must be well aware a man is not always master of himself, and when that man has been hurt in his mind by the application of expressions which I will go so far as to say had not ought to have been made use of," His voice was rising all this time, and his face growing redder. "No, sir, and here, if you will permit of it, I should like to explain to you in a very few words the exact state of the bone of contention. This cask, I might more truly call it a firkin of beer." I felt it was time to interpose, and said that I did not see that it would help us very much to go into that matter in detail. Mr. Bowman acquiesced, and resumed more calmly. "Well, sir, I bow to your ruling, and, as you say, be that here or be it there, it don't contribute a great deal, perhaps, to the present question. All I wish you to understand is that I am prepared, as you are yourself, to lend every hand to the business we have afore us, and, as I took the opportunity to say as much to the officers not 3/4 of an hour ago, to leave no stone unturned as may throw even a spark of light on this painful matter." In fact, Mr. Bowman did accompany us on our exploration, but though I am sure his genuine wish was to be helpful, I am afraid he did not contribute to the serious side of it. He appeared to be under the impression that we were likely to meet either Uncle Henry or the person responsible for his disappearance, walking about the fields, and did a great deal of shading his eyes with his hand, and calling our attention, by pointing with his stick, to distant cattle and labourers. He held several long conversations with old women whom we met, and was very strict and severe in his manner, but on each occasion returned to our party, saying, "Well, I find she don't seem to have no connection with this sad affair. I think you may take it from me, sir, as there's little or no light to be looked for from that quarter, not without she's keeping something back intentional." We gained no appreciable result, as I told you at starting. The Bow Street men have left the town, whether for London or not I am not sure. This evening I had company in the shape of a bagman, a smartish fellow. He knew what was going forward, but though he has been on the roads for some days about here, he had nothing to tell of suspicious characters, tramps, wandering sailors, or gipsies. He was very full of a capital Punch and Judy show he had seen this same day at W—, and asked if it had been here yet, and advised me by no means to miss it, if it does come. The best Punch and the best Toby dog, he said, he had ever come across. Toby dogs, you know, are the last new thing in the shows. I have only seen one myself, but before long all the men will have them. Now, why, you will want to know, do I trouble to write all this to you? I am obliged to do it, because it has something to do with another absurd trifle, as you will inevitably say, which, in my present state of rather unquiet fancy, nothing more perhaps, I have to put down. It is a dream, sir, which I am going to record, and I must say it is one of the oddest I have had. Is there anything in it beyond what the bagman's talk and Uncle Henry's disappearance could have suggested? You, I repeat, shall judge. I am not in a sufficiently cool and judicial frame to do so. It began with what I can only describe as a pulling aside of curtains, and I found myself seated in a place, I don't know whether indoors or out. There were people, only a few, on either side of me, but I did not recognize them, or indeed think much about them. They never spoke, but, so far as I remember, were all grave and pale-faced, and looked fixedly before them. Facing me there was a Punch and Judy show, perhaps rather larger than the ordinary ones, painted with black figures on a reddish-yellow ground. Behind it, and on each side, was only darkness, but in front there was a sufficiency of light. I was strung up to a high degree of expectation, and listened every moment to hear the panpipes and the rootootooit. Instead of that, there came suddenly an enormous, I can use no other word, an enormous single toll of a bell. I don't know from how far off, somewhere behind. The little curtain flew up, and the drama began. I believe someone once tried to rewrite Punch as a serious tragedy, but whoever he may have been, this performance would have suited him exactly. There was something satanic about the hero. He varied his methods of attack. For some of his victims he lay in wait, and to see his horrible face, it was yellowish-white, I may remark, peering round the wings, made me think of the vampire in Fuseli's foul sketch. To others he was polite and carneying, particularly to the unfortunate alien who can only say "Shalabala," though what Punch said I never could catch. But with all of them I came to dread the moment of death. The crack of the stick on their skulls, which in the ordinary way delights me, had here a crushing sound, as if the bone was giving way, and the victims quivered and kicked as they lay. The baby, it sounds more ridiculous as I go on, the baby, I am sure, was alive. Punch wrung its neck, and if the choke or squeak which it gave were not real, I know nothing of reality. The stage got perceptibly darker as each crime was consummated, and at last there was one murder which was done quite in the dark, so that I could see nothing of the victim, and took some time to effect. It was accompanied by hard breathing and horrible muffled sounds, and after it Punch came and sat on the footboard, and fanned himself, and looked at his shoes, which were bloody, and hung his head on one side, and sniggered in so deadly a fashion that I saw some of those beside me cover their faces, and I would gladly have done the same. But in the meantime the scene behind Punch was clearing, and showed not the usual house front, but something more ambitious, a grove of trees and the gentle slope of a hill, with a very natural, in fact I should say a real, moon shining on it. Over this there rose slowly an object which I soon perceived to be a human figure with something peculiar about the head. What, I was unable at first to see. It did not stand on its feet, but began creeping or dragging itself across the middle distance towards Punch, who still sat back to it. And by this time, I may remark, though it did not occur to me at the moment, that all pretence of this being a puppet show had vanished. Punch was still Punch, it is true, but, like the others, was, in some sense, a live creature, and both moved themselves at their own will. When I next glanced at him he was sitting in malignant reflection, but in another instant something seemed to attract his attention, and he first sat up sharply and then turned round, and evidently caught sight of the person that was approaching him, and was in fact now very near. Then, indeed, did he show unmistakable signs of terror. Catching up his stick, he rushed towards the wood, only just eluding the arm of his pursuer, which was suddenly flung out to intercept him. It was with a revulsion which I cannot easily express that I now saw, more or less clearly, what this pursuer was like. He was a sturdy figure, clad in black, and, as I thought, wearing bands. His head was covered with a whitish bag. The chase which now began lasted I do not know how long, now among the trees, now along the slope of the field, sometimes both figures disappearing wholly for a few seconds, and only some uncertain sounds letting one know that they were still afoot. At length there came a moment when Punch, evidently exhausted, staggered in from the left and threw himself down among the trees. His pursuer was not long after him, and came looking uncertainly from side to side. Then, catching sight of the figure on the ground, he too threw himself down. His back was turned to the audience, and with a swift motion twitched the covering from his head and thrust his face into that of Punch. Everything on the instant grew dark. There was one long, loud, shuddering scream, and I awoke to find myself looking straight into the face of what in all the world do you think but a large owl, which was seated on my window-sill, immediately opposite my bed-foot, holding up its wings like two shrouded arms. I caught the fierce glance of its yellow eyes, and then it was gone. I heard the single enormous bell again, very likely, as you are saying to yourself, the church clock, but I do not think so. And then I was broad awake. All this, I may say, happened within the last half-hour. There was no probability of my getting to sleep again, so I got up, put on clothes enough to keep me warm, and am writing this rigmarole in the first hours of Christmas Day. Have I left out anything? Yes, there was no Toby dog, and the names over the front of the Punch and Judy booth were Kidman and Gallop,
which was certainly not what the bagman told me to look out for. By this time I feel a little more as if I could sleep, so this shall be sealed and wafered. Letter 4. December the 26th, 37. My dear Robert, all is over. The body has been found. I do not make excuses for not having sent off my news by last night's mail, for the simple reason that I was incapable of putting pen to paper. The events that attended the discovery bewildered me so completely that I needed what I could get of a night's rest to enable me to face the situation at all. Now I can give you my journal of the day, certainly the strangest Christmas day that ever I spent, or am likely to spend. The first incident was not very serious. Mr. Bowman had, I think, been keeping Christmas Eve, and was a little inclined to be captious. At least, he was not on foot very early, and, to judge from what I could hear, neither men nor maids could do anything to please him. The latter were certainly reduced to tears, nor am I sure that Mr. Bowman succeeded in preserving a manly composure. At any rate, when I came downstairs, it was in a broken voice that he wished me the compliments of the season, and a little later on, when he paid his visit of ceremony at breakfast, he was far from cheerful, even Byronic, I might almost say, in his outlook on life. "I don't know," he said, "if you think with me, sir, but every Christmas as comes round the world seems a hollerer thing to me. Why, take an example now from what lays under my own eye. There's my servant Eliza, been with me now for going on 15 years. I thought I could have placed my confidence in Eliza, and yet this very morning, Christmas morning too, of all the blessed days in the year, with the bells a-ringing and all like that, I say, this very morning, had it not been for Providence watching over us all, that girl would have put, indeed I may go so far as to say had put, the cheese on your breakfast table." He saw I was about to speak, and waved his hand at me. "It's all very well for you to say, 'Yes, Mr. Bowman,' but you took away the cheese and locked it up in the cupboard, which I did, and have the key here, or if not the actual key, one very much about the same size. That's true enough, sir, but what do you think is the effect of that action on me? Why, it's no exaggeration for me to say that the ground is cut from under my feet, and yet when I said as much to Eliza, not nasty, mind you, but just firm-like, what was my return? 'Oh,' she says, 'well,' she says, 'there wasn't no bones broke, I suppose?' Well, sir, it hurt me. That's all I can say, it hurt me, and I don't like to think of it now." There was an ominous pause here, in which I ventured to say something like, "Yes, very trying," and then asked at what hour the church service was to be. 11 o'clock, Mr. Bowman said with a heavy sigh. "Ah, you won't have no such discourse from poor Mr. Lucas as what you would have done from our late rector. Him and me may have had our little differences, and did do, more's the pity." I could see that a powerful effort was needed to keep him off the vexed question of the cask of beer, but he made it. "But I will say this, that a better preacher, nor yet one to stand faster by his rights, or what he considered to be his rights. However, that's not the question now. I, for one, never set under. Some might say, was he an eloquent man? And to that my answer would be, well, there you've a better right, perhaps, to speak of your own uncle than what I have. Others might ask, did he keep a hold of his congregation? And there again I should reply, that depends. But as I say, yes, Eliza, my girl, I'm coming. 11 o'clock, sir, and you inquire for the King's Head pew." I believe Eliza had been very near the door, and shall consider it in my veil. The next episode was church. I felt Mr. Lucas had a difficult task in doing justice to Christmas sentiments, and also to the feeling of disquiet and regret which, whatever Mr. Bowman might say, was clearly prevalent. I do not think he rose to the occasion. I was uncomfortable. The organ wolved, you know what I mean, the wind died, twice in the Christmas hymn, and the tenor bell, I suppose owing to some negligence on the part of the ringers, kept sounding faintly about once in a minute during the sermon. The clerk sent up a man to see to it, but he seemed unable to do much. I was glad when it was over. There was an odd incident, too, before the service. I went in rather early, and came upon two men carrying the parish beer back to its place under the tower. From what I overheard them saying,
It appeared that it had been put out by mistake by someone who was not there. I also saw the clerk busy folding up a moth-eaten velvet pall, not a sight for Christmas Day. I dined soon after this, and then, feeling disinclined to go out, took my seat by the fire in the parlour with the last number of Pickwick, which I had been saving up for some days. I thought I could be sure of keeping awake over this, but I turned out as bad as our friend Smith. I suppose it was 2:30 when I was roused by a piercing whistle and laughing and talking voices outside in the market-place. It was a Punch and Judy. I had no doubt the one that my bagman had seen at W—. I was half delighted, half not, the latter because my unpleasant dream came back to me so vividly. But anyhow I determined to see it through, and I sent Eliza out with a crown piece to the performers, and a request that they would face my window if they could manage it. The show was a very smart new one. The names of the proprietors, I need hardly tell you, were Italian, Foresta and Calpigi. The Toby dog was there, as I had been led to expect. All B— turned out, but did not obstruct my view, for I was at the large first-floor window, and not 10 yards away. The play began on the stroke of 2:45 by the church clock. Certainly it was very good, and I was soon relieved to find that the disgust my dream had given me for Punch's onslaughts on his ill-starred visitors was only transient. I laughed at the demise of the turncock, the foreigner, the beadle, and even the baby. The only drawback was the Toby dog's developing a tendency to howl in the wrong place. Something had occurred, I suppose, to upset him, and something considerable, for I forget exactly at what point he gave a most lamentable cry, leapt off the footboard, and shot away across the market-place and down a side street. There was a stage wait, but only a brief one. I suppose the men decided that it was no good going after him, and that he was likely to turn up again at night. We went on. Punch dealt faithfully with Judy, and in fact with all comers. And then came the moment when the gallows was erected, and the great scene with Mr. Ketch was to be enacted. It was now that something happened of which I can certainly not yet see the import fully. You have witnessed an execution, and know what the criminal's head looks like with the cap on. If you are like me, you never wish to think of it again, and I do not willingly remind you of it. It was just such a head as that I, from my somewhat higher post, saw in the inside of the show box. But at first the audience did not see it. I expected it to emerge into their view, but instead of that there slowly rose for a few seconds an uncovered face, with an expression of terror upon it of which I have never imagined the like. It seemed as if the man, whoever he was being forcibly lifted, with his arms somehow pinioned or held back, towards the little gibbet on the stage. I could just see the night-capped head behind him. Then there was a cry and a crash. The whole show-box fell over backwards. Kicking legs were seen among the ruins, and then 2 figures, as some said, I can only answer for one, were visible running at top speed across the square, and disappearing in a lane which leads to the fields. Of course, everybody gave chase. I followed, but the pace was killing, and very few were literally, at the death. It happened in a chalk pit. The man went over the edge quite blindly and broke his neck. They searched everywhere for the other, until it occurred to me to ask whether he had ever left the market-place. At first, everyone was sure that he had, but when we came to look, he was there, under the show-box, dead too. But in the chalk pit it was that poor Uncle Henry's body was found, with a sack over the head, the throat horribly mangled. It was a peaked corner of the sack sticking out of the soil that attracted attention. I cannot bring myself to write in greater detail. I forgot to say the men's real names were Kidman and Gallop. I feel sure I have heard them, but no one here seems to know anything about them. I am coming to you as soon as I can after the funeral. I must tell you when we meet what I think of it all. End of chapter 4.
Chapter 5 of A Thin Ghost and Others by M.R. James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Yearsley. Two Doctors. It is a very common thing in my experience to find papers shut up in old books, but one of the rarest things to come across any such that are at all interesting. Still, it does happen, and one should never destroy them unlooked at. Now, it was a practice of mine before the war, occasionally to buy old ledgers of which the paper was good, and which possessed a good many blank leaves, and to extract these and use them for my own notes and writings. One such I purchased for a small sum in 1911. It was tightly clasped, and its boards were warped, by having for years been obliged to embrace a number of extraneous sheets. 3/4 of this inserted matter had lost all vestige of importance for any living human being. One bundle had not. That it belonged to a lawyer is certain, for it is endorsed "the strangest case I have yet met," and bears initials and an address in Gray's Inn. It is only materials for a case, and consists of statements by possible witnesses. The man who would have been the defendant or prisoner seems never to have appeared. The dossier is not complete, but such as it is, it furnishes a riddle in which the supernatural appears to play a part. You must see what you can make of it. The following is the setting and the tale as I elicit it. Dr. Abel was walking in his garden one afternoon, waiting for his horse to be brought round, that he might set out on his visits for the day. As the place was Islington, the month June, and the year 1718, we conceived the surroundings as being countrified and pleasant. To him entered his confidential servant, Luke Jennett, who had been with him 20 years. I said I wished to speak to him, and what I had to say might take some quarter of an hour. He accordingly bade me go into his study, which was a room opening on the terrace path where he was walking, and came in himself and sat down. I told him that, much against my will, I must look out for another place. He inquired what was my reason, in consideration I had been so long with him. I said, if he would excuse me, he would do me a great kindness, because this appears to have been common form even in 1718. I was one that always liked to have everything pleasant about me. As well as I can remember, he said that was his case likewise, but he would wish to know why I should change my mind after so many years. And, says he, you know there can be no talk of a remembrance of you in my will, if you leave my service now. I said I had made my reckoning of that. Then, says he, you must have some complaint to make, and if I could, I would willingly set it right. And at that I told him, not seeing how I could keep it back, the matter of my former affidavit and of the bedstaff in the dispensing room, and said that a house where such things happened was no place for me. At which he, looking very black upon me, said no more, but called me fool, and said he would pay what was owing me in the morning. And so, his horse being waiting, went out. So for that night I lodged with my sister's husband near Battle Bridge, and came early next morning to my late master, who then made a great matter that I had not lain in his house, and stopped the crown out of my wages owing. After that I took service here and there, not for long at a time, and saw no more of him till I came to be Dr. Quin's man at Dodd's Hall in Islington. There is one very obscure part in this statement, namely, the reference to the former affidavit and the matter of the bedstaff. The former affidavit is not in the bundle of papers. It is to be feared that it was taken out to be read because of its special oddity, and not put back. Of what nature the story was may be guessed later, but as yet no clue has been put into our hands. The rector of Islington, Jonathan Pratt, is the next to step forward. He furnishes particulars of the standing and reputation of Dr. Abel and Dr. Quin, both of whom lived and practised in his parish. It is not to be supposed, he says, that a physician should be a regular attendant at morning and evening prayers, or at the Wednesday lectures, but within the measure of their ability I would say that both these persons fulfilled their obligations as loyal members of the Church of England. At the same time, as you desire my private mind, I must say in the language of the schools, distinguo.
Dr. A was to me a source of perplexity, Dr. Q, to my eye, a plain, honest believer, not inquiring over closely into points of belief, but squaring his practice to what lights he had. The other interested himself in questions to which Providence, as I hold, designs no answer to be given us in this state. He would ask me, for example, what place I believed those beings now to hold in the scheme of creation, which by some are thought neither to have stood fast when the rebel angels fell, nor to have joined with them to the full pitch of their transgression. As was suitable, my first answer to him was a question, what warrant he had for supposing any such beings to exist? For that there was none in Scripture, I took it he was aware. It appeared, for as I am on the subject the whole tale may be given, that he grounded himself on such passages as that of the satire which Jerome tells us conversed with Antony, but thought too that some parts of Scripture might be cited in support. And besides, says he, you know 'tis the universal belief among those that spend their days and nights abroad, and I would add that if your calling took you so continuously as it does me about the country lanes by night, you might not be so surprised as I see you to be by my suggestion. You are then of John Milton's mind, I said, and hold that millions of spiritual creatures walk the earth unseen, both when we wake and when we sleep. I do not know, he said, why Milton should take upon himself to say unseen, though to be sure he was blind when he wrote that, but for the rest, why, yes, I think he was in the right. Well, I said, though not so often as you, I am not seldom called abroad pretty late, but I have no mind of meeting a satyr in our Islington lanes in all the years I have been here, and if you have had the better luck, I am sure the Royal Society would be glad to know of it. I am reminded of these trifling expressions because Dr. A took them so ill, stamping out of the room in a huff, with some such word as that these high and dry parsons had no eyes but for a prayer book or a pint of wine. But this was not the only time that our conversation took a remarkable turn. There was an evening when he came in, at first seeming gay and in good spirits, but afterwards, as he sat and smoked by the fire, falling into a musing way, out of which, to rouse him, I said pleasantly that I supposed he had had no meetings of late with his odd friends, a question which did effectually arouse him, for he looked most wildly and as if scared upon me, and said, "You were never there? I did not see you. Who brought you?" And then in a more collected tone, "What was this about a meeting? I believe I must have been in a doze." To which I answered that I was thinking of fauns and centaurs in the dark lane, and not of a witch's Sabbath, but it seemed he took it differently. "Well," said he, "I can plead guilty to neither, but I find you very much more of a sceptic than becomes your cloth. If you care to know about the dark lane, you might do worse than ask my housekeeper that lived at the other end of it when she was a child." "Yes," said I, "and the old women in the almshouse, and the children in the kennel. If I were you, I would send to your brother Quin for a bolus to clear your brain." "Damn Quin," says he, "talk no more of him. He has embezzled 4 of my best patients this month. I believe it is that cursed man of his, Jennet, that used to be with me. His tongue is never still. It should be nailed to the pillory if he had his deserts." This, I may say, was the only time of his showing me that he had any grudge against either Dr. Quin or Jennet, and, as was my business, I did my best to persuade him he was mistaken in them. Yet it could not be denied that some respectable families in the parish had given him the cold shoulder, and for no reason that they were willing to allege. The end was that he said he had not done so ill at Islington, but that he could afford to live at ease elsewhere when he chose, and anyhow he bore Dr. Quin no malice. I think I now remember what observation of mine drew him into the train of thought which he next pursued. It was, I believe, my mentioning some juggling tricks which my brother in the East Indies had seen at the court of the Rajah of Mysore. A convenient thing enough, said Dr. Abel to me, if by some arrangement a man could get the power of communicating motion and energy to inanimate objects. As if the axe should move itself against him that lifts it, something of that kind. Well, I don't know that that was in my mind so much, but if you could summon such a volume from your shelf, or even order it to open at the right page. He was sitting by the fire. It was a cold evening, and stretched out his hand that way, and just then the fire irons, or at least the poker, fell over towards him with a great clatter, and I did not hear what else he said. But I told him that I could not easily conceive of an arrangement, as he called it, of such a kind that would not include as one of its conditions a heavier payment than any Christian would care to make, to which he assented. But, he said, I have no doubt these bargains can be made very tempting, very persuasive. Still, you would not favour them, eh, Doctor? No, I suppose not. This is as much as I know of Dr. Abel's mind and the feeling between these men. Dr. Quinn, as I said, was a plain, honest creature, and a man to whom I would have gone. Indeed, I have before now gone to him for advice on matters of business. He was, however, every now and again, and particularly of late, not exempt from troublesome fancies. There was certainly a time when he was so much harassed by his dreams that he could not keep them to himself, but would tell them to his acquaintances, and among them to me. I was at supper at his house, and he was not inclined to let me leave him at my usual time. "If you go," he said, "there will be nothing for it, but I must go to bed and dream of the chrysalis." "You might be worse off," said I. "I do not think it," he said, and he shook himself like a man who is displeased with the complexion of his thoughts. "I only meant," said I, "that a chrysalis is an innocent thing. This one is not," he said, "and I do not care to think of it." However, sooner than lose my company, he was fain to tell me, for I pressed him, that this was a dream which had come to him several times of late, and even more than once in a night. It was to this effect, that he seemed to himself to wake under an extreme compulsion to rise and go out of doors. So he would dress himself and go down to his garden door. By the door there stood a spade, which he must take and go out into the garden, and at a particular place in the shrubbery, somewhat clear, and upon which the moon shone, for there was always in his dream a full moon, he would feel himself forced to dig. And after some time the spade would uncover something light-coloured, which he would perceive to be a stuff, linen or woollen, and this he must clear with his hands. It was always the same, of the size of a man, and shaped like the chrysalis of a moth, with the folds showing a promise of an opening at one end. He could not describe how gladly he would have left all at this stage and run to the house, but he must not escape so easily. So, with many groans, and knowing only too well what to expect, he parted these folds of stuff, or, as it sometimes seemed to be, membrane, and disclosed a head covered with a smooth pink skin, which, breaking as the creature stirred, showed him his own face in a state of death. The telling of this so much disturbed him that I was forced, out of mere compassion, to sit with him the greater part of the night, and talk with him upon indifferent subjects. He said that upon every recurrence of this dream he woke and found himself, as it were, fighting for his breath. Another extract from Luke Jennett's long continuous statement comes in at this point. I never told tales of my master, Dr. Abel, to anybody in the neighbourhood. When I was in another service, I remember to have spoken to my fellow servants about the matter of the bedstaff, but I am sure I never said either I or he were the persons concerned, and it met with so little credit that I was affronted, and thought best to keep it to myself. And when I came back to Islington and found Dr. Abel still there, who I was told had left the parish, I was clear that it behoved me to use great discretion, for indeed I was afraid of the man, and it is certain I was no party to spreading any ill report of him. My master, Dr. Quinn, was a very just, honest man, and no maker of mischief.
I am sure he never stirred a finger, nor said a word by way of inducement to a soul to make them leave going to Dr. Abel and come to him. Nay, he would hardly be persuaded to attend them that came, until he was convinced that if he did not they would send into the town for a physician, rather than do as they had hitherto done. I believe it may be proved that Dr. Abel came into my master's house more than once. We had a new chambermaid out of Hertfordshire, and she asked me who was the gentleman that was looking after the master, that is, Dr. Quinn, when he was out, and seemed so disappointed that he was out. She said whoever he was, he knew the way of the house well, running at once into the study and then into the dispensing room, and last into the bedchamber. I made her tell me what he was like, and what she said was suitable enough to Dr. Abel, but besides, she told me she saw the same man at church, and someone told her that was the doctor. It was just after this that my master began to have his bad nights, and complained to me and other persons, and in particular what discomfort he suffered from his pillow and bedclothes. He said he must buy some to suit him, and should do his own marketing, and accordingly brought home a parcel which he said was of the right quality, but where he bought it we had then no knowledge, only they were marked in thread with a coronet and a bird. The women said they were of a sort not commonly met with, and very fine, and my master said they were the comfortablest he ever used, and he slept now both soft and deep. Also the feather pillows were the best sorted, and his head would sink into them as if they were a cloud, which I have myself remarked several times when I came to wake him of a morning, his face being almost hid by the pillow closing over it. I had never had any communication with Dr. Abel after I came back to Islington, but one day, when he passed me in the street and asked me whether I was not looking for another service, to which I answered I was very well suited where I was, but he said I was a fickle-minded fellow, and he doubted not he should soon hear I was on the world again, which indeed proved true. Dr. Pratt is next taken up where he left off. On the 16th I was called up out of my bed, soon after it was light, that is, about 5, with a message that Dr. Quinn was dead or dying. Making my way to his house, I found there was no doubt which was the truth. All the persons in the house, except the one that let me in, were already in his chamber and standing about his bed, but none touching him. He was stretched in the middle of the bed, on his back, without any disorder, and indeed had the appearance of one ready laid out for burial. His hands, I think, were even crossed on his breast. The only thing not usual was that nothing was to be seen of his face, the two ends of the pillow or bolster appearing to be closed quite over it. These I immediately pulled apart, at the same time rebuking those present, and especially the man, for not at once coming to the assistance of his master. He, however, only looked at me and shook his head, having evidently no more hope than myself that there was anything but a corpse before us. Indeed, it was plain to any one possessed of the least experience that he was not only dead, but had died of suffocation. Nor could it be conceived that his death was accidentally caused by the mere folding of the pillow over his face. How should he not, feeling the oppression, have lifted his hands to put it away, whereas not a fold of the sheet, which was closely gathered about him, as I now observed, was disordered? The next thing was to procure a physician. I had bethought me of this on leaving my house, and sent on the messenger who had come to me to Dr. Abel, but I now heard that he was away from home, and the nearest surgeon was got, who, however, could tell no more, at least without opening the body, than we already knew. As to any person entering the room with evil purpose, which was the next point to be cleared, it was visible that the bolts of the door were burst from their stanchions, and the stanchions broken away from the door-post by main force, and there was a sufficient body of witness, the smith among them, to testify that this had been done but a few minutes before I came. The chamber being moreover at the top of the house, the window was neither easy of access, nor did it show any sign of an exit made that way, either by marks upon the sill or footprints below upon soft mould. The surgeon's evidence forms, of course, part of the report of the inquest, but since it has nothing but remarks upon the healthy state of the larger organs, and the coagulation of blood in various parts of the body, it need not be reproduced. The verdict was death by the visitation of God. Annexed to the other papers is one which I was at first inclined to suppose had made its way among them by mistake. Upon further consideration, I think I can divine a reason for its presence. It relates to the rifling of a mausoleum in Middlesex, which stood in a park, now broken up, the property of a noble family, which I will not name. The outrage was not that of an ordinary resurrection man. The object, it seemed likely, was theft. The account is blunt and terrible. I shall not quote it. A dealer in the north of London suffered heavy penalties as a receiver of stolen goods in connection with the affair. End of chapter 5. And end of A Thin Ghost and Others by M. R. James.